Chapter 9:12. After Nightmare's death, the people of Michael's world thought hell was just a figure of speech and did not exist in real life. However, only a few higher-ups in the Sky Hall knew that the realm of hell was very true. They knew the realm of hell was a place of darkness, despair, and unending suffering. From the perspective of someone who found themselves in this accursed place, it was an unimaginable nightmare. The landscape was barren and desolate, devoid of any signs of life or beauty. The ground was rough and jagged, littered with sharp rocks and broken bones. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur, ash, and decay, making it difficult to breathe. In the distance, the skies were dark and foreboding, with black clouds swirling and lightning flashing in every direction. There was no sun or moon or natural light to guide one's way. Instead, the only light came from the flickering flames that rose up from the molten lava rivers that ran through the realm. As one moved through the realm, they encountered various forms of torment and torture. Servants of hell and other malevolent beings lurking in the shadows, eager to inflict pain and suffering on the hapless souls who had been damned to hell. The screams and cries of the damned could be heard echoing through the darkness, a constant reminder of the misery that awaited those who dared to enter this realm. In hell, there was no escape, no respite from the unrelenting agony that one was forced to endure. It was a place of eternal suffering, where the tormented souls were trapped forever, unable to find peace or rest. It was a place that one would do well to avoid, lest they found themselves lost in the darkness, doomed to suffer for all eternity. At the center of hell was the castle of the ruler of hell, was built in the center of a lone mountain, surrounded by jagged peaks and a moat of boiling lava. It was a massive, foreboding structure with black stone walls that reached up toward the dark, stormy sky. The gates were made of iron and adorned with twisted demonic faces, and the courtyard was filled with strange, otherworldly creatures. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur, and the sound of screams echoed from within the castle's walls. It was a place of eternal darkness and despair, where only the bravest or most foolish would dare to enter. Suddenly, a luminous orb materialized in the sky and drifted toward the castle. As the ball of light floated through the castle's halls, its illumination revealed a macabre and foreboding atmosphere. The walls were lined with skulls and bones of all shapes and sizes, arranged in twisted patterns. The floors were slick with blood and littered with the remains of the tortured souls who had met their gruesome fates within these walls. The air was heavy with the stench of decay and sulfur, and the flickering torches cast eerie shadows on the walls, making it seem like the castle was alive with malevolent spirits. The sound of dripping blood echoed through the hallways, and the occasional moan or scream of agony could be heard in the distance. Clearly, this was no ordinary castle but a place of unspeakable darkness and horror, ruled by an entity of unfathomable power and malice. The atmosphere grew even more sinister as the ball of light approached the throne hall. The walls were adorned with grotesque tapestries depicting scenes of torture and suffering, and the throne finally, it reached the throne hall, casting an eerie light on the ruler of hell as he sat upon his throne, which itself was carved from blackened bones and adorned with the skulls of defeated enemies. "Where am I?" A gentle voice sounded from the ball of light. As the gentle voice sounded from the ball of light, it echoed through the throne hall. Suddenly, a peal of devilish laughter erupted, filling the room with a menacing aura. The laughter came from the ruler of hell himself, who had appeared before the ball of light. He stood tall, with jet-black skin and 3 blazing eyes on his face that pierced through the darkness. His 4 muscular arms hung by his side, each one adorned with a different weapon. A set of large wings sprouted from his back, twitching with excitement as he surveyed his new guest. The ruler's eyes burned with a fierce flame, reflecting the fires of the underworld. His face was twisted in a wicked grin, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. He had no nose, but his nostrils flared as he breathed in the scent of his new prey. His pointed ears twitched, picking up on every sound in the room. With a voice that resonated through the entire throne hall, the 4-armed man declared, "Welcome to the depths of hell." The room burst into an eerie light as flames flickered and danced, illuminating the man's imposing form. Suddenly, a burst of flames erupted from every direction, engulfing a small ball of light that hovered in the air. The voice within the ball of light sounded disoriented as it responded, "Hell?" The 4-armed man laughed devilishly as he explained, "When mortals die in the upper realm, the lucky ones simply cease to exist. But the unfortunate souls end up here, in the depths of hell, with me. The ball of light seemed to tremble as the man continued, and you, my dear, are one of the most unfortunate of them all. The flames intensified with a flick of his wrist, casting menacing shadows across the room. The air grew thick with the scent of smoke and brimstone as the man towered over the tiny ball of light, ready to unleash the full force of his infernal powers. As the flames intensified, the ball of light within them flickered and pulsed, almost as if it were alive. The voice within sounded bewildered, unsure of what was happening. So, am I still alive? The voice asked tentatively. To the surprise of anyone who might find themselves in such a situation, the voice inside the ball of light rejoiced. It was a strange reaction to the hellish surroundings. Yes, rejoice with me and pray for your master, the Dark Lord, to come for you, the ruler of hell replied, a wicked gleam in his eye. The ball of light went silent for a moment as if processing the request. The ruler of hell's smile grew wider as he waited, anticipation written all over his twisted face. The voice within the ball of light spoke up, reluctant and unsure. You know about him? It asked, referring to Ghost, its friend, and the Dark Lord. The ruler of hell snickered, his 4 arms flexing as he took a step closer to the flickering orb. I know everything, he replied with a sinister chuckle. Yes, the voice within the ball of light belonged to Nightmare, the dragon who met his untimely demise at the hands of the possessed Noah. But now, Nightmare existed only as a soul, trapped within the confines of the ball of light that had materialized before the ruler of hell. Nightmare was disoriented and confused, his memory stretching only as far as when Noah plunged a sword through his heart. He had no idea what had transpired since then, but one thing was certain in his mind: he was dead and somehow ended up in hell. Nightmare quivered with fear as the ruler of hell approached, his 3 blazing eyes glinting with malicious intent. Flames flickered and danced, illuminating the ruler of hell's imposing form as he taunted Nightmare with his eternal suffering. You are trapped here, in my realm, the ruler of hell hissed, his voice echoing through the throne hall. And there is no escape from the torment that awaits you until the Dark Lord comes for you. Nightmare's soul writhed in agony as the flames intensified, casting menacing shadows across the room. The air grew thick with smoke and the sounds of screams and agony, and Nightmare knew that he was trapped in this eternal nightmare. The ruler of hell grinned wickedly, relishing the terror he had instilled in his new prisoner. He knew he had complete control over Nightmare's soul and would relish in his suffering for as long as he desired. As Nightmare hung in the balance, trapped between life and death, he knew he was in for an eternity of pain and suffering in the depths of hell unless Ghost himself ventured into the realm of hell for him. The agonizing scream of Nightmare echoed through the eerie castle, reverberating off the walls and sending shivers down the spines of all those who heard it. The ruler of hell had been tormenting the dragon's soul for what seemed like an eternity, reveling in the power he held over his captive prisoner. But even the ruler of hell grew tired of the dragon's screams, and he finally relented, allowing Nightmare a brief respite from his endless torture. You said you know everything, Nightmare growled, his voice laced with pain and anger. But if you truly knew who was coming for me, you wouldn't dare to continue torturing me like this. I am counting on his arrival, the ruler of hell growled, his 3 blazing eyes glinting with malicious intent. He will pay for what he did to me, but this time, I have something he cares about. You, little dragon, are my ticket away from this godforsaken place. The ruler of hell's voice echoed through the throne room, and the very walls seemed to shake with his rage. But despite his ferocious demeanor, there was a hint of desperation in his words. He had spent countless eons trapped in the depths of hell, cut off from his homeworld and everyone he had ever known. And now, finally, he saw a way out. For the ruler of hell, the prospect of returning to his homeworld and seeking revenge on those who had banished him was almost too good to be true. He had lost track of how many thousands of years he had spent in hell, but now, he finally had a chance to escape and unleash his wrath on those who had wronged him. Nightmare's soul quivered with fear as the ruler of hell loomed over him, his 4 muscular arms adorned with deadly weapons. The air grew thick with the stench of sulfur and brimstone, and the flames flickered and danced around them, casting eerie shadows on the walls. But even in the face of such overwhelming terror, Nightmare refused to back down. He knew that Ghost was coming for him and would do everything in his power to ensure that his master arrived in time to save him. As the ruler of Hell laughed maniacally, reveling in his newfound power, Nightmare steeled himself for the torture to come. With a fierce determination burning within him, Nightmare waited for the arrival of Ghost, knowing that only he had the power to defeat the ruler of Hell and set him free from his eternal torment. Chapter 9:13. Pay with Blood. The Grand Hall was filled with an aura of anticipation as the three great clans of the Sea Folk realm, House Halrid, House Big Mag, and House Gladrath, gathered to attend the trial by combat. Michael, the Dark Lord, stood at the center of the hall, his presence commanding and intimidating. He patiently waited for the final group to arrive, eager to see who dared to take the spirit child from his realm. Suddenly, the space around him distorted once again, and a swirling vortex appeared. Out of the portal stepped a group of mermans, their golden robes shimmering in the light. Their arrogant eyes scanned the hall, exuding an air of superiority that made even the most powerful cultivators in the room feel small. But when their eyes landed on Michael, their expressions shifted to one of stunned disbelief. Grizzle, the man leading the group, was the only one who maintained his composure. He had anticipated the Dark Lord's arrival and had prepared himself accordingly. The mermans floated above the ground, their eyes fixed on the human before them. Michael, in turn, took a step forward, his expression unreadable but his eyes burning with a dangerous fire. As Gormak's group and Valen's group made way for the Dark Lord, the tension in the hall grew even thicker. Everyone could feel the animosity between the two forces as they met in the center of the room, their gazes locked in a fierce staring contest. Michael's killing intent was palpable, and the mermans could not help but feel a twinge of fear. The silence was deafening as the two faced off. The fate of the two proud houses hung in the balance, and all eyes were on them. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, as if a single word or action could ignite the spark that would set the entire realm ablaze. For a moment, time stood still. The mermans and the Dark Lord were like two opposing forces, ready to collide at any moment. But then, Grizzle broke the silence, his voice ringing out across the hall. So they stooped low enough to bring the Dark Lord into our world, Grizzle snickered. His tone was even and unwavering. Michael did not reply, but the look in his eyes said it all. The tension in the room reached its peak, and everyone held their breath, waiting for the inevitable clash between the mermans and the Dark Lord. As Michael took a single step forward, the tension in the hall became palpable. All the other mermans, who were poised to defend themselves, suddenly found themselves frozen in place, their eyes fixed on the Dark Lord. Gleeless, Grizzle's best friend, stepped forward to stand beside him, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of the sword dangling at his waist. But Grizzle did not flinch. He stood his ground, his piercing gaze locked with Michael's. A sense of eerie calm surrounded him, as if he had anticipated the Dark Lord's arrival all along. Michael leaned forward slightly, his eyes burning with an intense killing intent that could make even the bravest warrior shudder. The merman's apprehension was palpable as they tensed up, ready for whatever was to come. "Once I am done with the trial, you will face my trial, and I will be your executioner." Michael's words were spoken with a chilling calmness that belied the danger that he posed. The darkness in the hall seemed to intensify for a moment, causing the mermans to shift uneasily on their feet. There was a deafening silence for a few seconds as Michael and Grizzle continued to stare at each other, their eyes locked in a battle of wills. Finally, Grizzle spoke, his voice laced with a confidence that seemed to come from somewhere deep within. "I have been waiting for this day, Dark Lord," he said, his words dripping with a venomous sarcasm that sent shivers down the spines of the other mermans. Grizzle's gaze never wavered as he continued to stare at Michael. It was as if he was daring the Dark Lord to try and make a move against him. The tension in the hall was thick enough to cut with a knife, and everyone present knew that something significant was about to happen. Michael chuckled after hearing Grizzle. The air crackled with tension as Michael's laughter filled the hall, sending chills down the spine of everyone present. The darkness swirled around him like a living entity, its malevolent energy amplifying the Dark Lord's already overwhelming power. Mutrad, who once thought he had witnessed the full extent of Michael's might, knew Grizzle had made an enemy he shouldn't have. In Valen's eyes, the power the Dark Lord possessed was a power beyond comprehension, beyond the limits of what a mere mortal could possess. A cold, deadly calmness took over as Michael's laughter died down. His eyes gleamed with a fiery intensity as he fixed his gaze on the enemy who dared to take something precious from him. You took something precious from me but forgot one important detail. I am the Dark Lord and those who cross me never live to regret it. Michael's voice was like the sound of ice cracking, sharp and deadly. The atmosphere in the hall turned even darker, as if the very air had turned to stone. Even the bravest of hearts trembled in fear at the Dark Lord's wrath. Michael's power surged, reaching heights no one had ever witnessed. Some of the mermans who had thought they had succeeded in their mission now knew that they had awoken a sleeping dragon, and they would pay dearly for it. At that moment, Mutrad saw the Dark Lord's power reach the half-celestial stage, passing Grizzle's immortal level 10 cultivation. As the tension in the hall reached its peak, a voice that dripped with authority boomed, echoing through the grand space. Michael looked up to see figures materializing before each of the 8 thrones on the elevated platform. We will see how you dare to raise a finger against one of the proud sea folk, the elders, Mutrad mumbled, seeing the elders appear before the thrones one by one. Their presence exuded power and dominance, and their gazes were fixed on Michael with an intensity that made the Mutrad's skin crawl. Clearly, these sea folk took great pride in their heritage, and they weren't going to let anyone, even the Dark Lord, harm one of their own. Each of them was at the immortal stage level 10, but their auras were far stronger than the aura radiating from Grizzle. The 8 elders were an imposing sight, consisting of 3 mermans, 3 wraiths, and 2 earthens. Their eyes were fixated on Michael and the others, and their expressions were unreadable. The members of House Big Mag and House Halrid turned their gazes toward the elders, their bodies tensing up in fear. Valen shivered at the thought of asking the Dark Lord's help and how the elders would react. Though they hadn't broken any rules or laws by asking the Dark Lord to represent them in the trial by combat, they feared the wrath of the elders and hoped they wouldn't receive any punishment. The tension in the hall was thick enough to cut with a knife as everyone waited for the elders' response. Michael took a calculated step back, his eyes fixed on the elevated platform where the 8 elders sat in their respective thrones. He was expecting a response from them, but what he didn't expect was their gazes turning towards Valen and Gormak, who had asked for the Dark Lord's help in the trial by combat. The elders knew that the duo had not violated any laws or rules, but their anger was evident as their eyes blazed with fury. They were ashamed that their own descendants had lost their precious artifacts and had to resort to seeking help from the feared Dark Lord. The tension in the hall was palpable, and Michael could feel it crackling in the air. The elders' anger was a living, breathing thing that threatened to engulf the entire room. Michael stood tall, unflinching in the face of their wrath, his eyes blazing with a power that surpassed anything the elders had ever seen before. It was a silent standoff, each side sizing up the other, the stakes high and the consequences of their actions potentially dire. For a moment, no one moved, and the only sound that could be heard was the beating of their hearts. Finally, one of the merman elders spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of tradition and power. The merman elder spoke with a voice dripping with disdain and disappointment. It is a shameful thing to witness 2 houses, who were tasked with protecting the artifacts for thousands of years, lose them under their watch. We will not entertain any excuses, no matter how one tries to spin it. Losing the artifacts is not just a mark of shame, it is a sign of weakness. The Wraith Elder's piercing gaze scanned the room before settling on Gormak and Mutrad. And on top of losing the artifacts your ancestors protected for centuries, you have the audacity to invite the Dark Lord into our world, despite knowing the prophecies and the stories of his atrocities, he said in a voice filled with disdain. Grizzle's eyes gleamed with a hidden sense of pleasure as he watched the elders verbally lash out at the leaders of his rival houses. He knew that Valen and Gormak had thought bringing in the Dark Lord was a smart move, but they were unaware of the elders' power to change the rules of the trial by combat. Grizzle relished in their downfall and waited to see what fate the elders would bestow upon them. One of the Wraith elders spoke with a kind yet stern voice. There are some actions that one should refrain from, even if they do not violate any laws or rules. Your decision to seek the Dark Lord's aid in this matter is ill-advised and could have dire consequences for our world. He paused for a moment and continued, we must hear your reasoning for this choice. Why did you seek the help of the Dark Lord instead of relying on the strongest warriors from your own houses? The elder gave Valen and Gormak an opportunity to explain themselves, showing a willingness to listen before making any judgments. Valen stepped forward and lifted his head to meet the elder's gazes. "I will not make any excuses for the loss of our artifact," he began. "But we did not anticipate that a powerful ritual would be conducted using the blood of a spirit child to break the array that protected our artifacts." Valen's words were like a sudden bolt of lightning that struck the elders, leaving them momentarily stunned. The merman elder's face was etched with a deep frown, his eyes narrow with suspicion. "What proof do you have to support this allegation, Gormak?" asked the elder, his voice laced with skepticism. Gormak stood tall and confident as he answered, "Once we retrieve our artifacts, I will use the artifact of House Big Mag. If someone had used the blood of a spirit child, our artifact would find the spirit child." The elders exchanged uncertain glances, their minds racing as they considered the implications of Gormak's statement. "But that doesn't explain why you felt the need to invite the Dark Lord to our world," another elder, a wraith, spoke up. Before Gormak could answer, Michael stepped forward with a chilling declaration. "Because the spirit child was taken away from his home by one of your people." The room fell silent as the weight of Michael's words settled upon them. The tension in the air was palpable as the elders grappled with the severity of the situation. "What proof do you have for that claim?" the merman elder snarled, his eyes fixed on Michael, who stood with a calm expression. "Proof?" Michael's voice was low and dangerous, his eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. "I don't need proof. I will find the one who took the spirit child and make them pay with their blood and the blood of anyone who dared to stand with them. The water will turn red with their blood, and their screams will echo through history for eternity." Chapter 9:14, 20 million experience points. A sense of unease pervaded the hall as the elders contemplated the Dark Lord's chilling warning. They knew that they were no match for his power, and their limited options left them feeling vulnerable and exposed. The three great halls of the Water God, Sea Serpent, and Arctic were known for their peaceful ways, which kept them strong and united. They despised war and conflict, knowing that any disturbance in their realm would have far-reaching consequences. And yet, if the Dark Lord were to attack them, they would have no choice but to defend themselves. They knew that if they managed to defeat the Dark Lord, it would come at a great cost to their power and influence. But if they didn't fight, they would be seen as weak and vulnerable, and other factions might take advantage of their perceived weakness. The elders exchanged uneasy glances, each silently acknowledging the gravity of the situation. They were treading on dangerous ground, and the outcome was uncertain. Yet, they had no choice but to stand up to the Dark Lord and defend their honor and their people. As the tension in the hall mounted, the elders steeled themselves for the inevitable confrontation, bracing for the worst yet hoping for the best. The fate of their world hung in the balance, and they knew that they could not afford to fail. Impatience flickered in Michael's eyes as he awaited the elders to explain the rules and laws of the trial by combat. He was anxious to retrieve Harry and use the artifact of House Big Mag to locate him. The elders exchanged worried glances before the merman elder cleared his throat and began. "Following are the rules of this trial by combat. The House of Gladrath has placed their artifact in the ocean behind us." He gestured towards the shimmering waters behind them, separated by a glass wall. To win the trial and retrieve the lost artifacts, the challenged, the Dark Lord, must move through the sea and take the artifact of the House of Gladrath. However, the challenged is restricted to using only 3 spells, one for speed, one for defense, and one for attack. The elder finished, watching the faces of the participants. Valen, Mutrad, and House Big Mag looked surprised as they had not anticipated such limitations for the challenged. Michael remained composed, understanding that the restriction on spells was not a significant obstacle for him. The rules are clear, and the elders can dictate the battlefield and the challenged. The merman elder spoke with finality, silencing any objections. The wraith elder stepped forward to add, "Once you move into the waters, the cultivation level of all beings in the water will be suppressed to the half-immortal stage." It was a standard rule, but Michael was not affected. He had faith in his powers and knew that 3 spells were enough to defeat any opponent. Valen and the others exchanged apprehensive glances. They knew the elders had punished them by making the trial even more difficult, but they could not question the decision. The consequences of doing so were dire. Michael's eyes glinted with determination as he stepped toward the glass wall separating him from the ocean. Let's get this over with. I don't have much patience, he spoke with a hint of annoyance, eager to retrieve Harry. The elders nodded in agreement and simultaneously raised their hands in the air. In that moment, a vortex appeared before the glass wall, and Michael knew it was time to make his move. With a swift motion, he willed the APD to inject a pill that would enable him to breathe underwater directly into his bloodstream. As the tingling sensation spread throughout his body, Michael's back began to feel like it was on fire. Suddenly, gills appeared behind his ears, and skin grew between his fingers, enabling him to move through the water with the grace and speed of a fish. The sight was nothing short of awe-inspiring, as Michael's form seemed to blur as he dived into the vortex and into the deep blue sea beyond. The elders watched in silent awe, knowing that they had just sent one of the most dangerous beings in their realm into a battle that would surely test his limits. After Michael disappeared into the swirling waters, the elders turned to each other with tense expressions. When Michael swam deeper into the ocean, the pressure increased, and his ears started ringing. It was like the ocean was trying to crush him with its immense weight. However, he refused to let the pressure get the best of him. His gills worked like a charm, and he was able to breathe without any trouble. He noticed that the water was devoid of any signs of life as he swam further. It was as if the ocean had been stripped of its inhabitants. The eerie silence was broken only by the sound of his heartbeat. The anticipation in the hall was palpable as everyone watched Michael's progress with bated breath. The merman elder whispered to the other elders, "Do you think the Dark Lord will succeed?" Michael continued to swim further and further, scanning his surroundings for any signs of the artifact. The ocean was vast, and he knew that he had a long way to go. The thought of Harry's fate drove him forward. As Michael approached the shimmering artifact, he noticed a group of half-immortals lurking in the shadows, waiting to ambush him. Using his environmental scanning ability, Michael identified the presence of 20 half-immortals and something far more powerful than them lurking in the dark waters around the artifact. Upon getting closer to the artifact, Michael observed it was in the shape of a triangle with a golden sun built inside, pulsating with powerful energy. However, his attention was swiftly drawn to the entity lurking in the shadows, which he sensed was the guardian of the artifact, the one Mutrad had warned him about. Despite the danger, Michael remained composed and prepared to face whatever lay ahead. His X-ray vision allowed him to see through the darkness and anticipate the attacks of the half-immortals. Michael halted in his tracks and unsheathed his dark swords. The blades crackled with red lightning, illuminating the surrounding water with an eerie glow. Without any warning, Michael dashed towards a lurking half-immortal with lightning-fast speed, using his lightning dash technique. His figure blurred as he moved through the water like a bolt of lightning. The half-immortal was caught off guard and paid the ultimate price, losing its head to Michael's swift strike. The water around them turned from a serene blue to a violent red, stained with the half-immortal's blood. The other half-immortals lurking in the shadows quickly realized that Michael had sensed their ambush and was prepared to defend himself. Feeling the weight of their guardian's protection, the half-immortals summoned their cultivation techniques, each unleashing their own unique powers. Despite the overwhelming odds, Michael remained calm and focused, his eyes locked on the pulsating artifact. He knew that the guardian was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But first, he had to take out these pesky half-immortals. Michael could feel the water around him churning as the half-immortals began to unleash their spells. The first one shot a powerful water blast towards Michael, who managed to dodge it by quickly moving to the side. As he did so, the water around him rippled, creating a whirlpool. Another half-immortal created a bubble around Michael, trapping him inside only to see Michael cut the bubble like it was nothing using his dark swords. Meanwhile, the third half-immortal casts a spell that created a powerful gust of wind, pushing Michael back. Michael managed to keep his footing, but the wind was so strong that it almost knocked him off balance for a moment. The fourth half-immortal shot a beam of light towards Michael, which he barely managed to block with his dark swords. The light was blinding, and Michael had to close his eyes for a moment. Michael could feel the pressure building up around him as more and more half-immortals joined the battle. The half-immortals were relentless in their attacks, but Michael remained focused and prepared to strike back. His eyes turned pitch black, and dark energy began to emanate from his body. Suddenly, dark beams shot out from his eyes, penetrating through the chest of a half-immortal and leaving a gaping hole. The half-immortal with a gaping hole in his chest writhed in agony as Michael's attack spell hit him. He tried to react, but Michael dashed at him before he could, his dark sword cutting through the water like a hot knife through butter. In one swift motion, Michael cleaved the half-immortal's head clean off his shoulders. Blood spurted out in all directions, turning the water around them into a crimson red. The other half-immortals paused their attacks for a moment and looked at Michael in awe and fear. His devilish grin and the way he crushed the head with his bare hand to a pulp sent shivers down their spines. They knew then that they were facing a truly formidable opponent, one who had no qualms about taking their lives. But the battle was far from over. The remaining half-immortals, emboldened by their numbers, launched a coordinated attack on Michael. Spells of lightning and fire shot toward him, but Michael was too quick for them. He deflected them with his dark swords, sending them back at his attackers. The water around them churned and boiled with the intensity of the battle, and Michael's eyes burned with a fierce determination. Michael increased his speed after taking out the half-immortal and pushed himself to the limit. The other half-immortals could barely see him as he moved like a blur through the water. They continued to bombard him with spells, but Michael's responsive shield absorbed the attacks and his godly body protected him from any direct hits. Although some spells managed to graze Michael, they were nowhere close to slowing him down. His eyes glinted with excitement as he darted between the half-immortals, his dark swords flashing in the water. The half-immortals grew more and more desperate, realizing that their spells were no match for Michael's power. But Michael knew that he could not let his guard down. One wrong move could mean his demise. He remained alert and focused, anticipating their attacks and dodging with lightning-fast reflexes. The water around them turned red with the blood of the fallen half-immortals, a testament to Michael's power and skill in battle. Michael was aware that the half-immortals were weaker than him, but he refused to underestimate them. His seemingly calm and careless demeanor hid the fact that he was completely focused on the battle. Michael moved through the water, shooting dark beams out of his eyes and swinging his dark swords with deadly precision. He anticipated their spells and moved like a bolt of lightning before the spells could hit him, cleaving their heads off one by one. Despite his strength, Michael didn't let his guard down. He knew that even the weakest half-immortal could be deadly if given the opportunity. He was like a shark in a feeding frenzy, moving through the water with deadly grace and speed. The water around them turned red with the blood of the half-immortals as Michael continued his assault. He seemed unstoppable, taking out one after the other with ease. But even as the battle raged on, Michael remained focused, never once letting his guard down. Valen and the others were watching the battle from the glass wall with bated breath. They gasped and murmured among themselves as they saw Michael take out one half-immortal after another. Gormak was equally shocked but also impressed. "He's much more powerful than we anticipated," he said, his voice filled with admiration. Valen nodded in agreement. "He's like a force of nature," he said, his eyes fixed on Michael's figure as he moved through the water with deadly precision. The elders looked on with mixed emotions, impressed by Michael's power but also concerned about the repercussions of the trial. "This trial may have consequences beyond what we anticipated," said the merman elder with a furrowed brow. But Michael continued his onslaught, determined to retrieve the artifact and find Harry. His dark swords glinted in the water as he moved, a blur of power and precision. The half-immortals had no chance against him. Chapter 9:15, Fighting a giant underwater. With the water around him now stained red from the blood of the defeated half-immortals, Michael approached the shimmering artifact of House Gladrath with caution. He knew that the guardian of the artifact was lurking somewhere in the dark waters and he remained alert for any sign of movement. As Michael drew closer to the artifact, he felt the temperature of the water rising and strong ripples in the water around him. Suddenly, a giant eye opened in the water, staring directly at Michael. The eye was enormous, easily several times larger than Michael himself. Its pupil was an eerie shade of green that seemed to glow in the dark water. The creature that possessed the eye was massive, its size almost impossible to comprehend. Its body was covered in scales that shimmered in the dim light. Its snake-like body stretched out for what seemed like miles, and its massive tail whipped through the water with immense power. Its jaws were lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth, ready to tear apart anything that dared to challenge it. As Michael stood in front of the creature, he felt a sense of dread wash over him. He had never seen anything like this before, and he knew that he was no match for it in terms of size and brute strength. But he remained focused, knowing he had come too far to back down. The giant belonged to the rare and powerful race of giants in the sea realm. They were considered the most powerful race and the first to inhabit the deep oceans. According to ancient scripts, all the other races in the sea realm had descended from them. When the giant guardian noticed Michael trying to take the artifact, it didn't attack him immediately. Instead, it let out a deafening roar, creating giant waves in the water. The warning clearly indicated the creature's intelligence, and Michael knew that the guardian was not to be underestimated. If it had been a mindless creature, it would have attacked him already. For a few moments, Michael remained still, his eyes locked onto the giant creature. Despite its size, Michael didn't feel intimidated. He sensed a strange power emanating from the giant, and he knew that it could break out of the array if it wanted to. Finally, Michael spoke up. "I am going to take this artifact." "Back off," he warned the creature, his voice steady and unwavering. The giant let out another deafening roar, creating more waves in the water. Michael stood his ground, ready to face whatever the creature had in store for him. The other elders and their entourages watched in awe and fear, wondering what would happen next. Time seemed to slow down as Michael cautiously extended his hand toward the artifact. But the moment his fingers made contact, the giant roared with fury, unleashing a powerful force that sent Michael hurtling backward through the water. The impact caused intense vibrations that rattled his inner organs and he coughed up blood. With a fierce determination, Michael willed the APD to inject a healing potion into his body, determined not to let this setback defeat him. "So you choose violence," Michael's voice echoed through the ocean, a challenge in his tone. Despite the overwhelming power of the giant, Michael refused to back down. The giant remained silent for a few moments, its massive eye locked onto Michael's smaller form. As Michael looked up at the giant creature, he felt a sense of awe and fear overwhelm him. The creature was easily 10 times the size of a blue whale, the largest animal in the world. Its skin was a deep shade of black and had a rough texture, with several protruding spikes along its back. Its eyes were bright red, with slitted pupils that seemed to bore into Michael's soul. The creature moved with a fluid grace that belied its enormous size. Each time it moved, it created massive ripples in the water, sending smaller sea creatures scurrying away in fear. As it roared, the water around it seemed to vibrate with a powerful force that threatened to knock Michael off his feet. As the giant creature moved toward Michael, the people in the hall watched in awe and terror. They had never seen anything like it before. Valen and the other members of House Big Mag were particularly shocked by the size and power of the giant. "What kind of creature is that?" Valen muttered under his breath. The sight of the giant creature sent a shiver down the spines of those in the hall. Even House Big Mag and House Halrid, who had their own giant guardians, were awestruck by the sheer size of the creature before them. Its immense body was unlike anything they had ever seen, and the way it moved through the water sent ripples throughout the ocean. Michael remained still, his mind racing as he formed a plan to defeat the giant guardian. The scales and body of the creature looked too tough to be penetrated by a single shot of his dark beams. He was curious to see what effect his dark swords would have when he tried to cut the giant creature. Despite its monstrous size, the giant guardian was incredibly agile and fast. In the blink of an eye, it closed the gap between them and opened its massive jaws. The sight of the giant's razor-sharp teeth caused a ripple of fear to spread through the spectators in the hall. Valen, Mutrad, and the others watched with bated breath, their hearts racing as they witnessed the battle unfold before their eyes. "Can he defeat that thing?" Valen asked, his voice laced with uncertainty. "I don't know," Mutrad replied, his eyes fixed on the giant guardian. "But if anyone can do it, it's him." The tension in the hall was palpable as Michael stood his ground, waiting for the creature to make a move. The spectators, except House Gladrath in the hall, may have feared and hated the Dark Lord, but they couldn't help but root for him in the battle against the monstrous giant. They knew that the fate of their houses depended on his victory in the trial. Meanwhile, Michael remained focused on the task at hand, his two swords clutched tightly in his hands. As the giant creature opened its massive jaw, Michael quickly dodged out of the way, narrowly avoiding being swallowed whole by the beast. The giant was incredibly agile and fast, despite its massive size, and Michael knew that he couldn't afford to let his guard down for even a moment. He darted through the water, his dark swords at the ready, searching for a weakness in the creature's defenses. The giant creature seemed to rely solely on its massive size and brute strength, lacking any ability to cast spells. But its sheer size was already a huge advantage, and Michael knew he was in a tough battle. When he dodged the creature's jaw, it simply swung its spiked tail and sent Michael hurtling through the water. The spikes penetrated Michael's skin, causing intense pain, but he did not show any fear. Instead, he felt a rush of excitement at the prospect of facing such a massive creature underwater. Despite the pain, Michael quickly regained his composure and assessed his options. His dark beams had proved ineffective against the giant creature's tough scales, but he still had one weapon left to try, his dark swords. Without hesitation, Michael charged at the creature with his swords at the ready. The creature swung its tail again, but Michael was ready this time. He skillfully dodged the spikes and sliced at the creature's scales with his swords. To Michael's surprise, the dark swords were able to penetrate the creature's tough hide. The giant creature roared in pain as Michael continued to slash at it, causing deep wounds. The water around them turned red as the creature bled profusely. The people in the hall were on the edge of their seats as they watched the intense battle unfold. The sound of clashing swords and roaring echoed through the water, adding to the drama of the scene. Some of them were amazed at Michael's skill and courage, while others were terrified by the sheer size and power of the giant creature. Michael's dark swords cut deep with each slash, leaving marks on the giant guardian's body. But even with his strength and skill, the cuts seemed insignificant compared to the creature's massive size. Despite this, Michael did not give up and continued to fight with all his might. On his 10th strike, the giant creature let out a deafening roar and swung its body, hitting Michael with tremendous force and sending him hurtling through the water once again. This time, the creature did not give Michael any chance to recover. It let out a series of powerful roars, sending shockwaves through the water and hitting Michael with incredible force. The impact was like being hit by a freight train, causing Michael to cough up blood and feel immense pain throughout his body. Despite this, he did not let go of his swords and remained determined to defeat the giant creature. With lightning-fast reflexes, Michael managed to dodge the giant creature's attacks, but the creature was relentless in its pursuit. Suddenly, the creature increased its speed, moving with astonishing agility and appearing before Michael in the blink of an eye. Michael tried to dodge out of the way, but it was too late. The giant opened its massive jaws, ready to snap Michael up in its mouth. But Michael was not one to give up without a fight. With fierce determination, he plunged his dark sword into the creature's upper jaw and used his raw brute strength to keep the creature from closing its mouth completely. The creature roared in pain and anger, thrashing about in the water and trying to shake Michael off. Despite the danger, Michael remained focused and held on tight to his sword, gritting his teeth as he struggled to keep the creature's jaws open. He knew that one wrong move could mean the end for him, but he refused to give up. Arg! With a burst of adrenaline, Michael summoned all his strength and pushed the creature back, managing to free himself from its deadly grip. Breathless and battered, Michael knew that the battle was far from over. But he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 9:16. Michael meets Harry. Michael's fate seemed sealed as the giant creature finally managed to close its massive jaws, enclosing him within. The onlookers in the hall were stunned and a hush fell over the room as they watched in horror. Members of House Gladrath, including Jealous and Grizzle, wickedly smiled, thinking that the Dark Lord's body would be melted inside the giant's acid stomach. House Big Mag and House Halrid looked pale and shivered at the thought of losing the trial by combat and being exiled from the Arctic Hall. But suddenly, the giant creature roared in pain. Its belly radiated a dim glow and started to churn, as if something inside it was fighting back. The creature's roar sounded more like a cry of agony than one of anger. The members of House Gladrath were bewildered, while House Big Mag and House Halrid watched in amazement as the giant creature's belly began to bulge and change shape. The giant creature started to swim around the artifact in a frenzy, barrel rolling and thrashing about wildly. Suddenly, it stopped moving and opened its jaw for a long, piercing howl. The water around them vibrated with the force of the sound waves. Then, to everyone's shock, Michael shot right out of the giant's mouth, covered in red goo and blood from the creature's insides. As soon as Michael escaped the giant's belly, he and the creature locked eyes, as if communicating wordlessly. Mutrad watched in awe, wondering what kind of unspoken message was being exchanged between them. But the surprise wasn't over yet. Instead of attacking Michael or trying to reclaim the artifact, the giant creature swam away from it, leaving Michael to claim it without resistance. This sight shocked House Gladrath and left the elders confused and speechless. Meanwhile, Michael wasted no time and quickly swam toward the artifact. As soon as he touched it, the artifact vibrated in his hand and then, to everyone's amazement, 2 more artifacts materialized in the water beside him. One was a scepter made of emerald and decorated with rubies and other gems, while the other was a mysterious, icy blue metal orb with no visible designs or markings. The elders and members of the Arctic Hall were left in utter shock at the sight of the Dark Lord's victory over the giant guardian. They had never seen such a fierce battle before, and the fact that Michael emerged victorious over such a massive creature was truly astonishing. The shock on their faces was evident as they stared at Michael, completely speechless. "Unbelievable," muttered one of the elders under his breath. "I've never seen anything like this before," said another, his eyes wide with disbelief. But the biggest shock came when the giant, instead of protecting the artifact, simply swam away. The members of House Gladrath were completely confused, and the elders were at a loss for words. "Why did the giant leave the artifact?" asked one of the elders, breaking the stunned silence that had filled the hall. "I don't know," replied another, shaking his head in disbelief. "But it must have had a good reason." The mysterious reason behind the giant's departure left everyone in the hall with more questions than answers. The atmosphere was filled with a sense of confusion and wonder as they tried to make sense of what had just happened. As Michael appeared in the hall with the 3 artifacts, the members of House Gladrath, except Grizzle, looked stunned and confused. They had lost their own artifact, yet their leader, Grizzle, did not show any sign of shock. Instead, he remained calm and composed as if he had expected this outcome. The others in the hall noticed his reaction and began to frown and murmur to each other. They could not understand how their leader could be so composed in the face of such a devastating loss. One of the members from House Halrid whispered, "How can he be so calm? They just lost their artifact." Another member from House Big Mag added, "Maybe he had a backup plan? This seems fishy." As Michael held the 3 artifacts in his hands, he turned to face the elders, who were visibly stunned by his victory over the giant guardian. A mixture of shock and admiration filled the hall as the Dark Lord stared at them with a calm expression. The elders quickly regained their composure and flicked their wrists, causing a spatial vortex to appear before Michael. Without hesitation, Michael stepped into the vortex and disappeared, leaving the elders to discuss his triumph in hushed tones. The other houses in the Arctic Hall were equally stunned by Michael's victory and the appearance of the artifacts. Some whispered in fear and others in awe, as they wondered what this meant for the upcoming trial. As for Michael, he reappeared in the hall, holding the artifacts tightly in his hands. The emerald scepter and icy blue metal orb radiated with a powerful energy that filled the room. Michael's dark swords were also pulsating with a red lightning bolt energy, which caused some of the weaker members in the room to back away. The silence was broken by Valen's voice, who spoke in a tone filled with reverence and relief. "The Dark Lord has emerged victorious, and with the artifacts in his possession, he is the winner of the trial by combat." The room erupted with murmurs of agreement and admiration as they watched Michael with a mixture of fear and respect. Michael stood tall and composed in the center of the room, his eyes scanning the faces of the gathered elders. His expression remained unreadable, but there was a glint of satisfaction in his gaze as he locked eyes with Grizzle, who couldn't help but shiver under his intense scrutiny. Michael's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere in the hall, with everyone on edge waiting for the outcome of the trial. Without a word, Michael handed over the 3 artifacts to the Merman Elder, who took them with a nod of acknowledgement. The members of House Big Mag and House Halrid moved closer, their eyes fixed on the artifacts with anticipation. Meanwhile, Grizzle couldn't help but feel a sense of dread wash over him. He knew they had made an enemy out of the Dark Lord for nothing, and it was clear that they would face the wrath of the Dark Lord one way or another. As the elders verified the authenticity of the artifacts, the tension in the room reached its peak. The silence was deafening as everyone waited for the verdict. Finally, the Merman Elder nodded in confirmation and handed the artifacts back to Michael. The members of House Big Mag and House Halrid breathed a collective sigh of relief and made their way to the elders to begin their end of the bargain. Meanwhile, Grizzle and the other members of House Gladrath stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The atmosphere in the Arctic Hall was tense as the Merman Elder spoke. House Big Mag and House Halrid have won the trial by combat, he declared. Their artifact will be returned to them. I hope this time they will be able to protect it and avoid seeking the Dark Lord's help. His displeasure with the 2 houses seeking the Dark Lord's help was evident. The Merman Elder then turned his attention to Grizzle, the leader of House Gladrath. He knew that the disappearance of the artifacts was connected to a ritual that involved using a spirit child's blood. Although House Big Mag and House Halrid didn't directly accuse House Gladrath of kidnapping the spirit child and using its blood for the ritual, the elder could sense the implication. After all, how else could House Gladrath have come into possession of the artifacts and challenged the other 2 houses to a trial by combat? If House Gladrath really used a spirit child's blood to steal the artifacts, we will get to the bottom of it, the Merman Elder declared firmly. Their actions have resulted in House Halrid and House Big Mag seeking the Dark Lord's help. We will not stand for such desperate and reckless behavior. The other elders nodded in agreement, their expressions stern. The Merman Elder continued, we, the elders of the proud Arctic Hall, will not tolerate such actions. We will find out who is responsible and they will face the consequences of their actions. Grizzle looked uneasy under the elder's intense gaze. He knew that House Gladrath would be under close scrutiny from now on and that they would have to tread carefully if they wanted to avoid being punished. Michael paid no attention to the elders and their threats. Instead, he turned his steely gaze towards Valen and Gormak. I have fulfilled my end of the bargain. It's time for you to fulfill yours, Michael said, his tone stern and commanding. Valen, clearly uncomfortable in the elders' presence, quickly suggested they relocate somewhere else. But the elders had other plans. No, we would like to see the truth of your claims, said one of the elders firmly. Michael shot a triumphant look over his shoulder at Grizzle and the members of House Gladrath. Your little game is about to come to an end, he snickered, relishing in his victory. Gormak wasted no time and reached out his hand as the icy blue orb floated toward him and landed on his palm. Put a drop of your blood on the sphere, Gormak instructed, his eyes fixed on Michael. Without hesitation, Michael drew the dark sword and sliced his palm, letting the blood drip onto the orb. As soon as the blood touched the surface, the orb lit up with a pulsating glow. The temperature rose steadily until Gormak's hand started to burn, but he held on tightly to the artifact. Suddenly, a spatial vortex appeared in the hall, catching everyone's attention. Michael was taken aback. He thought the orb would only show the location of Harry, not open a portal to his whereabouts. Michael hesitated to step into the portal, fearing that it might be a trap set by the Dark Lord's enemies. Instead, he summoned a drone and commanded it to fly through the portal to scout the other side. Mutrad, however, had mixed emotions as he observed the scene. He couldn't help feeling a sense of awe at the Dark Lord's power and intelligence, but also a hint of fear and unease at the thought of being on his bad side. As Michael finally made his way towards the portal, Mutrad saw a sudden flash of rage and shock in his eyes, as if something had caught him off guard. The tension in the hall was palpable as everyone waited anxiously to see what the drone would uncover on the other side of the portal. As Michael stepped out of the portal, the world around him seemed to shift and change. He found himself standing in a grand hall, with high ceilings and few furnishings. In the center of the room, a young woman with black hair and blue robes was reading a book to a small child who looked to be no more than 4 or 5 years old. But as soon as she saw Michael, the book slipped from her grasp and her eyes turned a menacing shade of red. Her fists clenched as she glared at the Dark Lord, who stood cold and imposing in front of her. The child looked up at the commotion. Confusion etched on his face as he watched the stranger in front of him. Michael didn't flinch, even as the woman's anger radiated off of her like waves. He simply looked at her with a stoic expression, waiting for her to make the first move. It was none other than Edith Alden, the sister of Layla Alden. Michael last saw Edith when he killed her best friend, Victoria Barnes. After that incident, Edith disappeared from the face of the world, leaving no trace behind. As Michael stood there, staring at Edith, the child beside her looked up at him curiously. The child was unaware of the tension between Michael and Edith, and his innocent eyes sparkled with curiosity. As Michael was staring at Edith, the elders and everyone else in the hall stepped out of the portal. The atmosphere in the hall became tense as suddenly, Michael turned around and dashed at Grizzle. With lightning-fast speed, he grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the wall. The other members of House Gladrath were shocked and froze in place as they watched the Dark Lord's rage. The elders were quick to react, raising their hands to cast spells to stop Michael, but he merely flicked his wrist, sending a shockingly powerful wind blast that sent the elders flying. With a wicked grin on his face, Grizzle taunted Michael, "You wanted to know who took your spirit child? Look no further. She took him." "You wanted me to see this," Michael hissed, his voice low and dangerous. Grizzle laughed again, enjoying the sight of the Dark Lord losing his composure. "Yes," he said confidently. "What are you going to do about it, Dark Lord?" "You cannot kill her." Michael's grip on Grizzle intensified, and he pulled him closer to his face. "I will deal with you later," he growled. Michael's eyes were fixed on Edith as he knocked out Grizzle with a single punch to the face. Then, he turned his attention back to Edith and unleashed another wind blast, knocking out everyone else in the room, leaving only the child standing before him and Edith. The child had black hair that fell in gentle waves around his face, and his skin seemed to glow in the dim light of the room. He had hazel eyes, much like his mother, Layla, and a slight resemblance to Michael, though he looked more like his mother. "Leaving you alive was a mistake," Michael said in a low and icy tone, causing Harry to feel a sudden wave of fear and confusion wash over him. Despite his young age, Harry could sense the dangerous aura radiating from the stranger before him. He instinctively looked at Edith for comfort and reached out to her, gently grabbing her hand with his soft and tiny fingers. Chapter 9:17, Fate of Edith. Harry, despite his young age, stepped forward in front of Edith, standing his ground like a loyal soldier. Under any other circumstances, Michael might have found the child's courage endearing. But in that moment, he was consumed by rage. Edith had put Harry's life in danger simply to seek revenge. Michael couldn't forgive such a reckless act. Ignoring Harry completely, Michael began to approach Layla. As Michael advanced, Edith felt a fierce rage coursing through her veins. The memories of Michael's brutal massacre of her best friend Victoria and her family flooded her mind. Michael had destroyed everything she held dear in a matter of days, tearing apart her entire life. But while the world trembled before the fearsome power of the Dark Lord, Edith refused to back down. Her anger was so intense that it dwarfed any sense of fear. The others, including the elders, struggled to get back on their feet after being knocked out by the wind blast. Some of them mustered their strength and used arch-energy to heal their bodies, but their attempts were futile. A ring of flames as dark as midnight suddenly appeared around Michael, enclosing Edith and Harry within. The intense heat of the dark flames kept the others from getting closer to Michael and Edith. Despite meeting Michael's eyes filled with cold murderous intent, Edith remained firm, refusing to cower in fear. Her anger burned hotter than the dark flames themselves, fueling her determination to face Michael head-on. The two dark swords on Michael's back started to tremble as they had a mind of their own. They struggled to fly out of the sheath and land in Michael's hands, sensing his overwhelming rage. In Michael's anger, he didn't even bother to check on Harry or even talk to him for the first time in his life. Instead, Michael locked his gaze on Edith, his eyes filled with a cold, menacing intensity that sent shivers down her spine. The air around them crackled with tension, and it was clear that this confrontation was about to come to a violent end. Michael's gaze remained fixed on Edith, his eyes glinting with chilling intensity. "You used him to avenge your friend and her family," he said coldly, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you going to do? Kill me like you killed all those innocent people?" Edith snickered, turning her attention to Harry, who watched the exchange with wide eyes. "Did you or did you not know someone was sent to kill your sister?" Michael asked, his voice steady and unwavering. To his surprise, Edith showed no signs of shock or surprise. "Not everyone's a murderer like you," Edith replied, her voice dripping with venom. "Do you know why I didn't kill you?" Michael asked, his tone as icy as his gaze. He waited for a response, but when none came, he continued. "As much as you annoyed me, you did nothing wrong until you decided to use him to seek revenge against me. I should have known being with that bitch would have corrupted your soul." The word bitch was like a match to a powder keg. Edith's anger exploded, and she raised her hand to slap Michael with all her might. The sound of the slap echoed through the hall, making Harry jump in fright. Edith grabbed Michael by his collar and shook him, her eyes blazing with fury. Edith's voice was thick with rage as she stared defiantly at Michael. Her eyes blazed with an intensity that matched the dark flames that surrounded them. "How dare you speak ill of Victoria's memory? She was a kind and compassionate person, unlike you, a soulless murderer," she spat out. Michael's jaw clenched at her words, his eyes narrowing to slits. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he hissed. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," Edith shot back, her voice laced with venom. "You destroyed everything I loved, and for what? Your sick, twisted sense of justice?" The air around them crackled with tension, and Harry watched with wide eyes, unsure of what was happening. Edith stood before them, unafraid and defiant, her eyes blazing with a fury that matched Michael's. "Kill me," she hissed, "and show your son what you really are." At the sound of those words, Harry's heart stopped. He looked up at Michael, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. This man, who had been a stranger just moments ago, was his father. The revelation was almost too much to bear, and Harry felt like he was about to be sick. He wanted to run to his father, to feel the safety of his embrace, but the fear that gripped him was stronger. Michael turned to look at his son, and the cold, murderous intent that had been radiating from him seemed to dissipate slightly. He could see the fear in Harry's eyes, the confusion and the pain, which was like a punch to the gut. How could he explain to his son that he was the Dark Lord? How could he make him understand everything that turned him into this? Michael stood in front of Edith, his eyes filled with rage as she taunted him. "Show your dark spawn the way of your life," she sneered, her words hitting Michael like a blow to the gut. Michael's anger flared up, and he turned to face Edith, his voice low and dangerous. "You will not call him that," he growled, his eyes locking onto hers. Harry watched in shock as the two adults argued and taunted each other. The man standing before him was his father, but he was also a monster who had killed innocent people. Harry felt caught in the middle of a storm, unable to move or speak, as he tried to process everything that was happening. The air around them crackled with tension as Michael and Edith faced off, their gazes locked in a battle of wills. Harry could feel the weight of their anger and hatred pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He wanted to run, to escape the chaos and the pain, but he couldn't move. Michael had made the difficult decision to sever his connection with Harry, not because he didn't love his son, but because he wanted to protect him from the dangers that came with being the son of the Dark Lord. Michael had grown up as an orphan himself and knew firsthand the difficulties that came with it. He didn't want Harry and Layla to suffer the same fate. Michael knew that if anyone discovered Harry's true identity, they would stop at nothing to hunt him down. He had made the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of his son's safety, but all of it seemed to be for nothing now that Edith had crossed the line and put Harry's life in danger. On the other hand, Harry felt like he was caught in the middle of a storm, unable to move or speak. The man before him was his father, but he was also a monster. He didn't know what to do or what to say, and he could only watch as the two adults argued and taunted each other. As Harry's eyes darted back and forth between the two arguing adults, he suddenly felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. It was like tiny insects crawling over his skin, and before he could even process what was happening, he felt a sharp, searing pain. It was like a lightning bolt had struck him, and then everything went dark. Edith's attention immediately shifted to Harry as he collapsed to the floor. She rushed to his side and checked his pulse, her heart pounding with fear. She had not intended to harm the child, but the sight of Michael had ignited something in her that she could not control. Now, as she looked down at the unconscious boy, she felt a deep sense of regret and guilt. Michael's eyes glowed with killing intent as he slowly unsheathed his dark sword. The metal glinted in the light of the flames, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He knew what he had to do, what Edith's actions had forced him to do. With a cold, emotionless voice, he spoke the words that sealed Edith's fate. "I should have killed you a long time ago." Without hesitation, Michael plunged the sword straight into Edith's gut. Blood spurted out of the wound and dripped from the corners of her mouth, staining her clothes and the ground beneath her. Michael didn't say anything else or ask her any more questions. He knew what he had to do, and he did it without remorse. In that moment, Edith was no longer just an annoyance. She was a potential enemy, someone with enough grudge to put her own family in danger for the sake of revenge. An enemy like her couldn't be left alone. As Michael pushed the sword deeper, Edith leaned in towards him, a devilish grin on her face. He grabbed her hair and pulled her off his body, his eyes glowing with dark energy. With a single burst of power, he fired dark beams straight into Edith's head, taking her life immediately. A smoking hole appeared in the center of her forehead, and she fell to the ground beside unconscious Harry. Michael ignored the system notification of Edith's death and drowned at the moment. For a moment, there was only silence. Michael stood there, his sword still dripping with blood, looking down at Edith's lifeless body. He had done what he had to do, but he couldn't shake the feeling that all this could have been avoided if Edith had stayed away from Harry. With a heavy heart, he looked at Harry as his anger slowly faded away, looking at his innocent face. Michael knelt down beside his unconscious son, his heart heavy with worry and regret. He gently brushed Harry's face with his hand, his fingers lingering on his son's soft cheeks. For a brief moment, the Dark Lord within Michael disappeared, and the more gentle side of him came out. He felt a rush of love and protectiveness towards his son and wished he could shield him from all the darkness and danger of the world. But that side of him disappeared as soon as he saw Grizzle through the ring of dark flames. As the ring of fire dissipated, Michael stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes blazed with a fury that seemed to consume him, and Grizzle and Gleelis both took a step back in fear. The air around Michael crackled with dark energy, and he unsheathed his second dark sword, holding both weapons with a steady grip. Gleelis saw the rage in Michael's eyes and knew that he had to prepare to fight for Grizzle's life. The two swords on Michael's back trembled with a mind of their own, eager to be wielded by their master. The ground beneath their feet shook with the power emanating from Michael, and even the elders watching from afar could feel the moment's intensity. The hall was engulfed in an intense heat that lingered even after the dark flames dissipated. Mutrad could feel the sweat trickling down his forehead, but his mind was preoccupied with the Dark Lord's presence before him. As he looked into Michael's eyes, he was struck by a flood of memories from the Ithilien massacre. The same cold, unwavering gaze that had sent shivers down his spine then was present in the Dark Lord's eyes now. It was a look that promised destruction and death to anyone who dared cross him. The Merman elder stood tall, his voice echoing through the hall as he spoke to the Dark Lord. "You have your child and killed the one responsible for his disappearance. Now leave our world," he demanded. But Michael remained unmoved, his eyes blazing with an intense fury. He knew that his mission was far from over, and he was not about to be stopped by a group of Merman elders. Michael's response was simple but deadly. "You have two choices. Back off and save yourselves, or stand in my way and die with him," he said, raising his sword and pointing it at Grizzle. As Michael raised his sword and pointed it at Grizzle, Mutrad felt a sense of impending doom. The Dark Lord's eyes were filled with a fiery rage that Mutrad had seen before, during the massacre in Ithilien. He knew that Michael was not one to back down, and the Merman Elder's defiance could only lead to bloodshed. Mutrad's heart raced as he realized he might be witnessing another brutal massacre, and he wondered if there was anything he could do to prevent it. Chapter 9:18 Heavenly Tribulation. To reach half-celestial stage, Gleelis immediately stepped in front of Grizzle, shielding him from the Dark Lord's murderous gaze. The air was thick with tension as the elders stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, the darkness enveloped the room, plunging everything into pitch blackness. The only source of light was the faint glow of the deep blue sea filtering in through the window. But Mutrad's wraith eyes allowed him to see clearly in the dark, and he watched in horror as the scene unfolded. As the others braced themselves for a fight, the sound of flesh being pierced echoed throughout the room. Gleelis' head flew from his shoulders, blood spurting from his neck. Michael's strength had reached the half-celestial stage, making everyone in the room seem like weak ants in comparison. The Dark Lord didn't waste any time with words or unnecessary actions. Instead, he wielded his dark swords with deadly precision, firing dark beams from his eyes and lightning bolts from his swords to swiftly dispatch the members of the House of Gladrath. Mutrad could barely believe what he was seeing. The Dark Lord had become a force of destruction, cutting down anyone who stood in his way with ruthless efficiency. The sound of swords clashing and bodies falling echoed through the hall as Michael continued his rampage, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity that sent shivers down Mutrad's spine. The elders of the Merman tribe knew they had to act fast to defend themselves and their people. They quickly began chanting in unison, each casting their own spells. One elder cast a spell of water, trying to douse the flames that still surrounded the Dark Lord. Another cast a spell of wind, trying to blow him back. A third cast a spell of light, hoping to blind him. But Michael was too powerful for their spells. While he was battling, the responsive shield appeared around him, absorbing the attacks. Meanwhile, Mutrad watched the battle unfold with a mixture of horror. But even as he watched the destruction and chaos, he could not help but be terrified by Michael's rage and wrath. As the battle raged on, Michael moved with incredible speed and agility, dodging spells and slicing through the members of House Gladrath with his dark swords. He fired dark beams from his eyes and lightning bolts from his swords, each strike hitting its target with deadly accuracy. His opponents fell one by one, unable to withstand his power. And all the while, Mutrad could only watch in terror as the Dark Lord easily decimated his enemies. The members of House Halrid and House Big Mag stood rooted to the spot, watching in horror as the Dark Lord decimated their enemies. Valen's face was pale and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. What is happening? He panicked, his voice barely audible over the sound of clashing swords and dying screams. Gormak's loyal advisor was equally frightened. "We have to get the hell out of here," he muttered, his hands shaking. As the Dark Lord continued his killing spree, the panic in the room intensified. Members of both houses were shivering and some were even crying. The air was thick with the smell of blood and death, and the sound of metal against metal was deafening. Mutrad, who had been watching from a safe distance, could feel the terror emanating from the other members. He could see the fear in their eyes and hear their trembling voices as they whispered to each other. Despite the chaos around him, the Dark Lord moved with deadly precision, effortlessly avoiding the spells cast by the elders of House Gladrath. His responsive shield absorbed their attacks, while his retractable black shield protected him from any physical blows. He moved like a dark shadow, cutting down his enemies with ease. His eyes were cold and empty, and his face was twisted into a snarl of rage. As he fought, the Dark Lord seemed almost invincible, and the members of House Halrid and House Big Mag knew that they were powerless against him. Valen and Gormak exchanged a fearful glance, and Valen whispered, "We need to get out of here before he turns his attention to us." They quickly tried to reach the door, leaving behind carnage and chaos, but the spells flying around him prevented them from quickly reaching the door. As the darkness dissipated, the elders and members of House Gladrath lay motionless in their own pools of blood. The others who had witnessed the Dark Lord's gruesome display of power shivered at the sight of him. His face and body were covered in the blood of his foes, giving him a fearsome and intimidating appearance. With each step, Michael's dark aura seemed to grow stronger, causing the very air around him to tremble. As he approached Grizzle, the House Lord of House Gladrath, Michael unsheathed his dark swords, their tips dripping with blood. The atmosphere in the hall was tense and heavy, with everyone watching in stunned silence as Michael stood before Grizzle, his grip tight around the House Lord's collar. Despite the situation, Grizzle appeared unnaturally calm, almost as if he was expecting this. Michael's eyes fell on the shark medallion around Grizzle's neck, and a sense of realization dawned on him. He knew then that Grizzle was the one responsible for Lord Eric's assassination and had been buying time to complete the blood ritual to locate the 3 artifacts. Without a moment of hesitation, Michael lifted Grizzle higher by his collar and drew one of his dark swords. With a cold and menacing voice, he asked, "Do you have any last words?" Grizzle chuckled, his eyes glittering with defiance. "Hail Andor," he said, and before anyone could react, he moved his face towards the sword and sliced his own throat. Blood spurted out of his neck, splattering on Michael's face as Grizzle's head rolled on the ground, leaving the others horrified and shocked. Everyone felt a shiver run down his spine as they watched the scene unfold before them. They knew they were witnessing a true display of the Dark Lord's power and cruelty, and it sent chills through his body. Michael's eyes burned with dark flames as he dropped Grizzle's lifeless body to the ground. He wiped the blood off his face with the back of his hand. His face was calm. "Let this be an example for whoever tries to harm the ones I care about," he growled, his voice laced with venom. The members of House Halrid and House Big Mag, who were still alive, were paralyzed with fear and shock at the gruesome display of power. They huddled together, trembling with fear as Michael stood in front of them, his dark swords held in his hands, his gaze piercing through them. The room was silent, except for the sound of blood dripping from Michael's swords as he turned to leave the hall. Just as Michael was about to turn around, he felt a sudden jolt of electricity surge through his body, causing his hair to stand on end. He tried to react, but it was too late. A bolt of lightning had already shot out of Grizzle's body and struck him with an incredible force that he couldn't even see it coming. The impact was devastating, and Michael's vision began to blur. It was like his brain was on fire, and the system within his head started to go haywire, sending warning signals that he could barely comprehend. Omega's presence detected. Omega level warning. The warnings blared inside his head, causing Michael to clutch his head in agony. Activating countermeasures. System safe mode activated. The system continued to scream at him as he felt like his head was about to explode. The seal has been weakened. The host. Killed. Seal, bearer, but amidst the chaos and pain, Michael could not register the last 2 warnings. He staggered backward, trying to regain his balance, but his body felt like it was being torn apart. The shockwave had affected him on a fundamental level, and Michael knew that something drastic related to the system was about to happen. System needs badass. Points does host give permission. The pain was unbearable, and Michael felt like his head was about to explode. The static in his head made understanding the system's words difficult, but he knew he needed its help. He trusted the system enough to give it permission to do whatever it intended to do. The members of House Halrid and House Big Mag who witnessed the scene felt their hearts pounding with fear and shock, unsure of what was happening to the Dark Lord. The host must reach half celestial stage and upgrade the system to level 9. The host must another seed of darkness before upgrading the system. Michael felt like he was being torn apart as the system drained all of his 5 million badass points and every last one of his gold coins from his storage. The pain was unbearable, and he struggled to remain conscious as the system worked its magic. Suddenly, a blinding light enveloped him, and he felt himself being lifted off his feet. The next thing he knew, he was standing in front of a shimmering portal, its otherworldly energy pulsing through the air. Michael's heart was pounding in his chest as he realized what was happening. Without warning, the system pushed him forward, and Michael stumbled into the portal. As he fell through the swirling vortex of energy, he felt like he was being torn apart again. But this time, it was different. This time, he felt like he was being reborn. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Michael emerged from the other side of the portal. He looked around, taking in his new surroundings. Everything was different here. The sky was a deep shade of purple, and the trees were made of a strange, shimmering crystal. As Michael took his first steps in this new world, he couldn't help but wonder what happened to the system suddenly and why it sent him here. Must start heavenly tribulation. As Michael's vision slowly began to clear, he could hear the system's voice stuttering and fading away. He was surprised by what he was hearing. He thought he would need to upgrade the system first before he could trigger his heavenly tribulation and reach the half-celestial stage. But for some reason, the system was making an exception for him and allowing him to start his tribulation earlier. Michael could feel the power building up inside him like a raging storm waiting to be unleashed. He could hear the sound of thunder in the distance, and the air around him crackled with electricity. The system was pushing him forward, forcing him to confront his own limitations and push beyond them. Finally, Michael's leg gave out as he collapsed on the ground. Despite the pain and the overwhelming force of the tribulation, Michael gritted his teeth and endured. He could feel his body transforming, becoming something greater than it had ever been before. The power surged through him, and he knew that he was on the verge of ascending to a new level of power. "Wake me up soon, host, system offline." As Michael stood there in the silence of his own mind, his thoughts raced 1,000,000 miles an hour. He couldn't comprehend what had just happened, and he had so many questions about the system. Who was this Andor, and what did Grizzle mean by, "Hail Andor"? But as he was about to ponder more on these questions, he felt a sudden surge of energy within his body. The energy was like nothing he had ever felt before, and he knew that it was the start of his heavenly tribulation. The air around him began to swirl, and the temperature increased to an almost unbearable level. Michael's body began to tremble, and he could feel his muscles tensing up. His eyes turned pitch black as dark energy emanated from his body, and he knew that the tribulation was going to be intense. When Michael closed his eyes, a sudden surge of power coursed through his body, causing the temperature to drop and the air to become heavy with static electricity. The clouds above him quickly turned dark and ominous, and soon enough, the storm began. The rain poured down in heavy sheets, drenching everything in sight, including Michael himself. The thunder roared so loudly that it felt like the ground was shaking while the lightning bolts lit up the sky with blinding flashes of light. The wind howled like 1,000 demons, and tornadoes formed in the distance, tearing apart anything in their path. Despite the chaos and destruction happening around him, Michael remained still, his body glowing with an otherworldly light. He gritted his teeth and braced himself as the power within him continued to grow, making the storm even more violent and deadly. Everything that happened to this point with Michael is 5 days before Nightmare's death. The next chapter will resume from the current events. Chapter 919, Massacre in Pentown, present day. The tempestuous storm that had raged around the floating mountain had finally abated, and the dark ocean lay calm once more. Gaia had emerged victorious from her heavenly tribulation, ascending to the immortal stage with newfound power pulsing through her veins. She rose to her feet, her movements graceful and confident. Without a moment's hesitation, she ascended into the air and soared towards the kingdom of Kethan. Through the spider on Nightmare, Gaia had caught a glimpse of Norvin before the feed abruptly cut off. With Norvin being Noah's familiar, Gaia knew that she had to make her way to Pentown, where Noah's manor was located. It took her only a few hours to arrive, using a series of teleportation scrolls to hasten her journey. As she descended upon the glistening city, she bellowed out a deafening call for Noah, her voice echoing through the streets like thunder. "Noah!" Gaia's shout echoed like thunder, shaking the entire town. As if they were waiting for her, soldiers and guardians rose from the ground and surrounded her. However, when they saw Gaia's cultivation stage, their eyes glistened with fear. Nevertheless, they were ordered to prevent anyone from the Dark Lord's army from reaching Noah. Though they were afraid of her newfound power, they were tasked with ensuring that no one from the Dark Lord's army would be able to harm Noah. As the guardians closed in around her, a towering figure stepped forward to confront her. It was the Alpha Guardian of the Beast Guardians, Leonian, a creature that was half man, half lion. Leonian's body was rippling with muscle, his golden fur shimmering in the moonlight. His wavy mane flowed in the wind as he fixed Gaia with a steely gaze, his fierce eyes betraying no fear. He had been ordered to guard Noah at all costs, and he was determined to fulfill his duty. With a furious expression on her face, Gaia snarled, "Hand over that monkey, and no one will get hurt." Her eyes blazed with an intensity that made even the bravest soldiers quiver. As the seconds ticked by, Gaia could sense the tension building around her. More and more soldiers and guardians appeared, their armor glistening under the night sky. She could feel their eyes boring into her, sizing her up and weighing their options. "By the power invested in me by the Guardian Guild, I hereby order you to stand down," Leonian announced in a voice that commanded attention. Gaia gritted her teeth, feeling her frustration mounting. She had come too far to be stopped now, and she was not going to let anyone get in her way. "At least I tried," she spat, her eyes blazing with fury. Without warning, Gaia raised her hand and summoned a giant snake made of green poisonous mist. The cobra hissed at everyone and spit jade poison, causing the weaker soldiers to melt and the others to squirm in pain. Leonian sprang into action, his instincts kicking in as he cast a defensive spell. A translucent golden shield formed around him, shimmering like the surface of the sun. In the midst of the chaos, more and more soldiers and guardians arrived, their weapons at the ready. The air crackled with tension, and the night sky seemed to darken as the two sides faced off. Leonian stood tall, his eyes locked onto Gaia's, his stance unyielding. He knew what he had to do, and he would not falter. "You're not getting past me," he declared, his voice ringing out across the battlefield. Gaia's eyes narrowed as she snapped her fingers, creating a shower of sparks that crackled through the air like lightning. The green mist that surrounded her hissed and churned as if in response to the sudden burst of energy. And then, with a deafening roar, the mist exploded, sending shockwaves through the air that knocked everyone around Gaia off their feet. Soldiers and guardians alike were thrown through the sky like ragdolls, tumbling and spinning as they struggled to regain their bearings. Some managed to right themselves in midair, but others were not so lucky. They fell like dead flies, their bodies slamming into the ground with sickening thuds. As the smoke cleared, Gaia remained suspended in the air, her eyes blazing with power. She surveyed the chaos around her, showing no emotions on her face. The moment Leonian's shield shattered, he was left exposed and vulnerable to a follow-up attack. Gaia had a clear shot, but the other guardians and soldiers blocked her path and gave him time to cast his spell. Meanwhile, back on the ground, chaos erupted as the Guardians and Winston Manor soldiers began evacuating the city. They guided the panicked citizens toward the teleportation portal in the center of the city, urging them to move quickly and stay together. The scene in the sky was a nightmare. The clouds rumbled, and the sky crackled with energy as Gaia unleashed her fury on the Guardians and soldiers. She was at the immortal stage now, and there was no one in the city who could stop her. Her power was beyond comprehension as she ripped through the soldiers with her bare hands, leaving a trail of destruction in her wake. The sound of metal clashing against metal echoed throughout the city as her victims tried to defend themselves but to no avail. The city was in a state of complete chaos, with people screaming and running for their lives. The ground shook with every move Gaia made, and the air was thick with the stench of blood and fear. As she continued her rampage, more and more soldiers and guardians fell to her overwhelming power. Despite the chaos and destruction around them, the guardians and soldiers remained determined to protect the citizens and get them to safety. They worked together to create a path through the chaos, guiding the people toward the teleportation portal and ensuring that no one was left behind. As the battle raged on, it was clear that Gaia was determined to leave nothing standing in her path. Her eyes burned with a fierce intensity, and her movements were fluid and precise. The guardians and soldiers fought valiantly, but it seemed as though nothing could stop her. The fate of the city hung in the balance, and everyone waited with bated breath to see how it would all end. The sky turned a sickly shade of jade green as Gaia summoned a cobra made of thick, poisonous mist. The creature hissed and spewed its venomous breath, causing anyone who inhaled the toxic fumes to writhe in agony. Even those who were below the soul-refining stage immediately coughed up dark blood and fell to their deaths, their bodies plummeting from the sky like lifeless dolls. Amidst the chaos, Leonian sprang into action, summoning his trusty longsword that gleamed in the dim light. He was a formidable fighter, swift and agile despite being only a fusion stage cultivator. With his sword in hand, he charged at Gaia, hoping to take her down. But his luck ran out when he decided to go up against an immortal. Gaia met his attack head-on. Her movements were fluid and graceful. With one hand, she effortlessly caught the blade of Leonian's sword and crushed it with a single squeeze, the sound of shattering metal echoing through the air. Despite his years of training and experience, Leonian stood no chance against Gaia's godlike power. As the battle raged in the sky, people below began to panic, fear etched on their faces. They had never seen such a display of power before, and they had no idea what was happening. "Mommy, what's happening?" a little girl asked, tugging on her mother's dress. "I don't know, sweetie," her mother replied, her voice shaking. "But we need to get out of here." "Is the world ending?" a man shouted, running through the streets. "I don't know, but we need to get to safety," another replied, pulling his family along. People were running in every direction, screaming and crying as they tried to find a way out of the city. Some collapsed from the sheer panic of it all, their bodies trembling with fear. Others stumbled and fell, trampled by the stampede of frightened people. "Please, someone tell us what's happening," a woman pleaded, tears streaming down her face. But there was no one to answer her, no one who knew what was happening. The only thing they could do was run as fast as they could, and hope that they would make it out alive. A cruel smirk spread across Gaia's face as she observed Leonian, now unarmed and defenseless, standing before her. She snickered at him, taunting him with her words. "Pathetic," she hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. With lightning-fast movements, Gaia picked up a broken piece of Leonian's sword and charged at him. The air around her seemed to shimmer as she moved, leaving afterimages of herself behind. In a matter of seconds, she inflicted hundreds of deep cuts on Leonian's body, showing off her speed and agility. Leonian's lion-like face twisted in agony as he struggled to defend himself from Gaia's onslaught, but he stood no chance against her. She was too fast, too powerful, and too merciless. Each cut sent a wave of excruciating pain through his body, and he could feel his strength ebbing away. Gaia was determined to make the other Guardians and Winston Manor soldiers feel weak and helpless. With each slash of her blade, she wanted to show them just how vulnerable they were. And with each passing moment, her power grew stronger, fueled by the death of Nightmare. Meanwhile, on the ground, the people watched in horror as the battle unfolded in the sky. Fear and panic gripped their hearts as they saw the raw power of an immortal cultivator. "We have to get out of here," one woman screamed, grabbing her children and running towards the teleportation portal. "What's happening? Who's fighting up there?" a man asked, his voice trembling with fear. Others stood frozen in place, unable to comprehend the scale of the battle unfolding before them. They watched in horror as Gaia relentlessly attacked Leonian, cutting him to pieces without mercy. The sound of metal against flesh echoed through the air, sending shivers down their spines. In that moment, the people of Pentown realized that they were no match for the power of the immortals. They were just mortals, caught in the crossfire of a battle that was beyond their understanding. And all they could do was watch in terror as the sky burned with the flames of magic and the sound of clashing swords. As Gaia halted her merciless assault on Leonian, the Alpha Guardian's robes were drenched in blood and his once golden mane was now matted and messy. Gaia approached him with a calm and calculated expression, her eyes burning with newfound power. She slowly wrapped her hand around Leonian's neck, tightening her grip until he began to choke and wheeze. The air around them felt heavy and charged with tension. Gaia's other hand rested on Leonian's shoulder, and as the seconds ticked by, she began to exert more pressure, causing him to cry out in pain. His screams echoed through the night sky, a haunting reminder of the brutal battle that had unfolded before them. The other Guardians and soldiers looked on in horror, their fear palpable. Finally, Gaia's grip tightened to the point where Leonian's screams turned into a gurgling gasp. With a swift and brutal motion, she ripped his shoulder and body in two, a sickening sound accompanying the gruesome sight. Blood and gore spilled out from the torn flesh, coating Gaia's hand and arm. The other guardians and soldiers, now realizing the extent of Gaia's power, backed away in fear. They could feel the raw energy emanating from her, and it was clear that she was not someone to be trifled with. The atmosphere was charged with fear and panic, and the once peaceful night now felt like a battlefield. Gaia stood amidst the carnage, her body drenched in Leonian's blood. She had just slaughtered the Alpha Guardian of the Beast Guardians with terrifying ease. As she surveyed the destruction around her, a couple of airships suddenly appeared on the horizon, carrying hundreds of guardians. In truth, the guardians were merely buying time to convince the Council of Immortals to take action against Gaia. With Noah having cleansed the Guardian Guild of corruption, there were few half-immortals and immortals left to challenge her power. The guardians knew they were outmatched, but they hoped to delay Gaia long enough for reinforcements to arrive. However, as the airships approached, Gaia merely snorted in disdain. She had no fear of the guardians, and their feeble attempts to stop her were little more than an annoyance. The sky rumbled with the power of her aura as she prepared to face the next wave of opponents. As the airships approached in the distance, Gaia's eyes narrowed, and her attention shifted back to the guardians and Winston Manor soldiers surrounding her. She could sense the fear in their eyes, but it did nothing to quell the anger burning inside her. Without casting a spell, Gaia clenched her fist and dashed towards them, moving with a frightening speed. The guardians and soldiers hesitated for a moment before they tried to stop her. However, Gaia was in a rage, and nothing could stand in her way. She punched and kicked, and her movements were fluid, as if she had trained for this moment her entire life. Her strikes landed with bone-shattering force, and the guardians and soldiers dropped like flies. It was a brutal sight to behold, and the people watching from the ground couldn't help but feel a sense of horror at the violence unfolding before them. Gaia's hands were now coated in blood, and her eyes burned with an intensity that was terrifying to witness. As she continued her assault, Gaia's mind was filled with images of nightmare, and her heart ached with grief. She wanted to take her anger out on the ones who had caused her familiar's death. It was the only way she could find solace. Despite the overwhelming odds against them, the guardians and soldiers fought back with everything they had. But it was no use. Gaia's power was too great, and she was in a league of her own. One by one, they fell before her, and soon, the sky was silent except for Gaia's breaths filled with fury. Some of the guardians lost their courage to face Gaia when they saw her blood-drenched appearance. However, the moment they attempted to flee, Gaia's rage surged within her, and she charged after them. Like a ferocious beast, she caught up to them in an instant, snatched them by their heads, and violently slammed them together, their skulls shattering like brittle glass. Their screams of agony filled the air as their lifeless bodies fell from the sky. Gaia's eyes burned with a ruthless fury as she continued her brutal assault on the guardians and soldiers who had dared to stand against her. Her rage consumed her, and she showed no mercy, killing anyone who crossed her path with her bare hands. The once peaceful sky was now a scene of carnage as Gaia unleashed her wrath upon all who dared to oppose her. Gaia's body was drenched in the blood of her fallen foes, and her once white robes were now stained a deep shade of red. Drops of blood dripped from her hair and face, giving her a sinister appearance. Her eyes burned with a fierce intensity as she scanned the sky, waiting for the airships to approach. As the airships drew closer, Gaia's hands clenched into fists. She was ready to face whatever came her way, even if it meant more bloodshed. Her aura was thick with a dangerous energy, and her hair whipped around her face in the wind. Despite the bloody scene before her, Gaia showed no signs of remorse or hesitation. She had unleashed her fury upon her enemies and had come out victorious. The only thing left was to face whatever came next, and Gaia was more than ready for it. When Gaia was about to launch herself towards the Winston Manor, a voice boomed through the sky, echoing like thunder. "Stop!" Gaia's body tensed with rage as she abruptly halted her movement mid-charge. Even without turning around, she immediately recognized the voice that echoed through the sky. It was Zanali, her stepsister, or so she had thought until the revelation that Castiel was not her real father. Chapter 920, Kingdom of Nagaland. The storm raged on as Gaia and Zanali faced off, the howling wind and pouring rain creating a chaotic backdrop for their confrontation. The sky was a tumultuous mixture of dark clouds and flashes of lightning, casting an ominous glow over the battlefield. Gaia's eyes blazed with fury as she faced Zanali, her hands still slick with the blood of her fallen foes. Zanali felt a chill run down her spine as she stared into Gaia's murderous gaze. "Stop this unnecessary killing, Gaia. Norvin and Noah are not here," Zanali pleaded, hoping to reason with her estranged sister. But Gaia's rage burned hot, and she was not about to be swayed by Zanali's words. "So you know where they are," she snarled, tilting her face to the side in a menacing gesture. "I won't tell you," Zanali said firmly, her jaw set. Gaia's eyes narrowed, scanning the battlefield for any sign of her targets. But her attention was soon drawn to the portal on the ground, where a group of people were running toward them. Zanali saw the flicker of recognition in Gaia's eyes and knew that she had to act fast. Before Zanali could react, Gaia swooped down to the ground and snatched a little boy from his mother. The child's screams filled the air as Gaia flew back up into the sky, holding the boy by the throat. "What are you doing?" Zanali shouted in shock, her heart pounding in her chest. Gaia's grip on the child tightened, and Zanali could see the fear in his eyes as he struggled to breathe. The boy's mother screamed from the ground, but her cries were drowned out by the storm. "Tell me where they are, or you can scrape this little boy off the ground," Gaia hissed, her voice filled with malice. Zanali felt a surge of fear wash over her as she gazed up at Gaia, the rain lashing at her face. She knew that Gaia was capable of anything in her current state of mind. But Zanali also knew that she couldn't let her sister win. Taking a deep breath, Zanali gathered her courage and met Gaia's gaze head-on. "I won't give in to your threats, Gaia," she said firmly. "But you should know that the Guardians and Immortals are on their way here. You will pay for what you have done." Gaia's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the Guardians and Immortals, and Zanali could see a flicker of doubt in her expression. But the moment was fleeting, and Gaia's rage soon returned full force. "Then I have nothing to lose," Gaia snarled, tightening her grip on the little boy's throat. Zanali felt her heart race as she watched the scene unfold, the storm raging on around them. She knew that she had to act fast, or else the consequences would be dire. But how could she stop her own sister, who seemed hell-bent on destruction? The sound of thunder echoed through the sky as the two sisters faced off, the fate of the little boy hanging in the balance. The stormy weather seemed to mirror the turbulent emotions of the scene. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the grim determination etched on Gaia's face as she held the innocent boy hostage. Zanali's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to find the words to appease Gaia's rage. "Stop this madness, Gaia," Zanali pleaded. "There's no need for more bloodshed." But Gaia was beyond reason. Her eyes blazed with fury as she demanded to know the whereabouts of Norvin and Noah. Zanali knew that any answer she gave would be met with violence, and yet she couldn't bear to see an innocent life taken before her eyes. As the little boy dangled helplessly in Gaia's grasp, Zanali felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She had to do something to save him, even if it meant sacrificing her own safety. Gaia's grip tightened, and Zanali's heart skipped a beat. The moment hung in the air, charged with a sense of impending doom. Then, suddenly, Gaia released the boy, sending him tumbling towards the ground. Zanali's heart leaped into her throat as she reached out to catch him, but Gaia caught him first. "Do I look like I'm playing?" Gaia snarled, her eyes glinting with menace. Zanali knew that Gaia was serious. She couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. Gathering her courage, she told Gaia what she wanted to know. The Guardians and Noah were in Nagaland. "They are in Nagaland," as Zanali revealed the location of Norvin and Noah. Gaia's eyes widened in shock for a brief moment. Nagaland was her home kingdom, and the news that her enemies were hiding there caught her off guard. But she quickly regained her composure, and her face twisted into a sinister smile. "Nagaland, huh?" Gaia said, her voice dripping with malice. "Looks like you'll be going back home sooner than I thought." The stormy sky seemed to grow darker as Gaia's words echoed through the air. The wind howled around them, and lightning flashed in the distance as though the very elements were reacting to the evil that Gaia represented. Zanali couldn't help but feel a shiver run down her spine as she looked at her former sister. Gaia had always been dangerous, but now, with her thirst for revenge fueling her actions, she was downright terrifying. As Gaia turned her gaze in the direction of Nagaland, Zanali felt a sense of dread settle over her. She knew that Gaia was capable of terrible things, and she couldn't imagine what she would do when she reached her home kingdom. But Zanali also knew that she couldn't let Gaia continue on her path of destruction. She had to find a way to stop her, no matter the cost. Gaia's eyes blazed with an intense fury as she turned and flew towards her home kingdom, leaving Zanali to catch the falling boy. Zanali's heart sank as she held the trembling child, watching as his mother rushed to him, embracing him tightly. The stormy sky was a perfect reflection of the turmoil in Zanali's mind. The thought of facing Gaia and her ruthless army, let alone the possibility of the Dark Lord joining them, sent a shiver down her spine. Zanali could only hope that the Council of Immortals would make a quick decision and gather their forces to confront Gaia and her army. But as she looked up at the sky, her heart grew heavy with the realization that the battle to come would be nothing short of catastrophic. The fate of countless lives hung in the balance, and Zanali knew that the only way to end this was to put an end to Gaia's thirst for revenge once and for all. As she took to the air, Zanali couldn't shake off the sickening feeling in her gut. She knew that Gaia's rage would not be easily quenched, and the thought of the Dark Lord joining the fray made her feel even more uneasy. For the first time in a long time, Zanali felt a sense of dread wash over her, and she couldn't help but wonder if they were truly ready to face the darkness that was about to descend upon them. Zanali struggled to keep up with Gaia's swift teleportation, feeling the strain in her muscles with every step she took. Her lungs burned with each breath, but she could not afford to stop. She knew where Gaia was heading and had to reach there before it was too late. The kingdom was a marvel to behold, with towering structures and winding alleys that snaked through the city. The buildings were adorned with intricate carvings of snakes, and the streets were bustling with activity. However, at that moment, the kingdom looked void of people, as Zanali had ordered the evacuation as a precaution. Flying above the kingdom of Nagaland was a sight to behold. The island had a distinct shape, resembling a giant serpent winding through the ocean waves. The buildings were built in such a way that they appeared like scales on the serpent's body. They were mostly made of smooth stones and were curved in shape, giving them a unique, organic feel. The structures were also adorned with intricate carvings of serpents, adding to the overall theme of the kingdom. The island was surrounded by crystal-clear waters, and as Zanali flew over it, she could see schools of brightly colored fish darting through the coral reefs below. The island was also home to dense forests, with trees so tall that their tops seemed to brush against the sky. Mountain ranges dotted the landscape, their peaks covered in snow even during the warmest of seasons. Despite the natural beauty of the island, it was eerily silent. The absence of any signs of life was noticeable, and it was clear that Zanali had made the right choice to evacuate the kingdom as a precaution. Finally, after 3 years, Gaia returned to her home kingdom, soaring high above the island. She took a deep breath, trying to suppress the anger that boiled within her, threatening to spill out like molten lava. As she gazed upon the land that was once her sanctuary, she felt no sense of peace or calm. Instead, her heart was heavy with a thirst for revenge. At last, Gaia's gaze fell upon the castle, her home and the heart of her kingdom. She could see it from miles away, standing proud and tall amidst the greenery and shimmering blue waters of the island. It was the grandest and most elegant castle in the whole world, with its towering turrets, gleaming spires, and intricately designed architecture. Looking at the castle, she could not help but marvel at its grandeur. It stood tall, a magnificent structure made of white stone that shimmered in the sunlight. The castle was built in a style that was unique to Nagaland, with intricate carvings of serpents adorning its walls and pillars. The gates of the castle were made of pure gold and the doors were decorated with precious gems. The castle seemed to be alive with magic, emanating an aura of enchantment and wonder that was impossible to ignore. As Gaia flew closer, she could see the castle's many towers and spires, each one adorned with a different serpent statue. The main tower, which rose high above the others, was made entirely of crystal, and the sunlight that filtered through its walls created a beautiful rainbow of colors. Gaia felt a sense of awe as she realized that this castle was a true masterpiece of Naga architecture. When she got closer to the castle, a jade-green dome suddenly materialized around the entire structure, preventing her from entering. She felt a sharp sting in her hand when she touched the energy dome, indicating that the countermeasures were working effectively. Gaia gritted her teeth in frustration, feeling her anger and thirst for revenge intensify with each passing moment. Soon after, a group of elite soldiers emerged from the castle and surrounded her in the sky. These soldiers were the best of the best, each dressed in the finest armor and weapons that Nagaland had to offer. They were each at the fusion stage, and Gaia sensed that there were a few half-immortals guarding the castle as well. The sight of the soldiers only fueled Gaia's anger further. It was clear to her that Zanali was not taking any chances in order to prevent her from entering the castle. But Gaia was determined to make her way inside, no matter what it took. "You cannot get inside, Gaia." Gaia heard Zanali's voice and turned around. Zanali floated in the air with the royal guards of Nagaland by her side. The guards wore shining armor made of rare metals with intricate designs etched into them. Each guard had a spear in their hand, the tips of which glinted menacingly in the sunlight. They had stern expressions etched into their faces, and their eyes glowed with otherworldly power. Gaia knew that these half-immortal guards were the best of the best and could take on an army single-handedly. Despite standing by Zanala's side, there was a hint of reverence in the guards' eyes when they looked at Gaia. It was impossible to forget that she was once the elder princess of the kingdom, and some still saw her as a symbol of power and authority. However, their respect did not outweigh their fear, as they knew the extent of Gaia's ruthlessness too well. The mere thought of facing her sent shivers down their spines and made their hearts race with fear. Gaia could feel their fear emanating, and it only fueled her anger. Since when does the mighty super guardian need his bitch protecting him? It's usually the other way around. What has changed? Gaia said with a cold, hard edge to her voice. Gaia's eyes flickered with rage as she turned her attention to the royal guards and soldiers surrounding her. Her voice dripped with venom as she spoke. "I won't sully your sense of honor by asking you to step aside. I know you would rather die than let me pass through to the castle to get what I want." Gaia took a step forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "But make no mistake, I will get what I came for, no matter what the cost." The soldiers tensed at her words, their hands hovering over their weapons as they waited for her next move. "All this death and destruction for what, Gaia? For a dragon? When did you become so fond of a dragon?" asked Zanali with a hint of desperation in her voice. "Since you became a bitch to Noah," Gaia snickered, her eyes glinting with anger. "It's unfortunate that history tends to repeat itself," Gaia said with a cold, bitter laugh, her mind flashing back to the memory of burning down an entire prison filled with prisoners 3 years ago. The flames had been so bright and consuming, and the screams of the prisoners had echoed in her mind for months afterward. As Gaia's words echoed in the air, her eyes gleamed with a dangerous glint as she conjured a long bow and a jade arrow. The soldiers tensed and prepared themselves for an imminent battle. Each one of them was several times stronger and more powerful than the guardians, so Gaia did not take them lightly. The royal guardian quickly floated before Zanali, shielding her with their bodies. They were well aware of the danger that lurked around them, and their eyes flickered with a fierce determination. Zanali stood behind them, her eyes darting back and forth between Gaia and the soldiers. As Gaia pulled the bowstring taut, her eyes locked onto the soldiers, sizing them up with a steely gaze. The tension in the air was palpable, and every breath felt like a weighty burden. With a sudden movement, Gaia released the arrow, and it shot through the air with deadly precision. The soldiers moved quickly, dodging the arrow with an ease that spoke volumes about their skill. They were fast, their movements fluid and precise, and they closed in on Gaia with fierce determination. When the soldiers tried to attack Gaia with their spells, she dodged them with lightning speed. Some soldiers attempted to strike her with their swords and axes, but Gaia parried them with her bow and arrows. Her movements were too quick for the soldiers to keep up, and soon Gaia had taken down several soldiers with her precise shots. The soldiers were relentless, however, and they continued to press forward with their attacks. Gaia was moving with enough speed to leave after images as she aimed and fired with deadly accuracy. The clanging of metal on metal echoed throughout the sky as Gaia's arrows clashed against the soldiers' weapons. Gaia's movements were fluid and precise as she took down the first soldier with a single shot from her jade arrow. The soldier screamed in agony as the arrow pierced his chest, and his body fell to the ground. The remaining soldiers immediately attacked Gaia, casting spells that missed her by a hair's breadth due to her speed and agility. Gaia responded with a rain of arrows that tore through the soldiers' armor, and their blood splattered in all directions. The air was thick with the smell of burning flesh and blood as the soldiers fought fiercely to protect their home. However, Gaia was a formidable opponent, and her accuracy with the bow was unparalleled. She targeted their weak spots, and each shot found its mark, dropping the soldiers one by one. The sound of bones cracking and bodies falling filled the air, and Zanali watched in horror as the soldiers she had trained and fought alongside were mercilessly slaughtered. Zanali watched in horror as Gaia ruthlessly took down each soldier one by one. Despite being outnumbered, Gaia moved with an almost inhuman grace and speed, dodging every attack with ease and unleashing a flurry of deadly arrows. Zanali had never seen Gaia fight with such ferocity and brutality before, and it sent shivers down her spine. She knew that Gaia was fueled by anger and hatred, and there was no stopping her. Zanali felt helpless, and for the first time in a long time, she felt fear creeping into her heart. Chapter 921, Battle of Nagaland. As Gaia continued to fight, she drew her bow with unmatched grace and precision. Every arrow that she fired was a masterpiece, imbued with a powerful energy that only the Dark Lord could bestow. Each arrow had a distinct aura and power, ranging from ice, fire, and even poison. As the arrows whizzed through the air, they left a trail of destruction in their wake, striking their targets with deadly accuracy. Zanali watched in horror as the soldiers of Nagaland fell one by one, their bodies tumbling from the sky with a sickening thud. She knew that Gaia was not to be underestimated, but even she was stunned by the level of destruction that Gaia was capable of. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, and the ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen soldiers. Despite the number of soldiers fighting against her, Gaia continued to fight with a fierce determination, her eyes burning with an intensity that Zanali had never seen before. With each arrow that she fired, she seemed to grow stronger, her power pulsing through the air like a raging inferno. Zanali knew that this battle was far from over and that the fate of Nagaland hung in the balance. Although the soldiers were powerful, they were no match for an immortal stage level 2 warrior. As the last of the soldiers fell from the sky, Gaia's eyes burned with a murderous rage. The two royal guards beside Zanali knew they were no match for her, but they still had a duty to protect their princess. As they prepared to clash with Gaia, Zanali floated before them, shielding them from her sister's wrath. "You still don't understand, do you?" Gaia sneered. Zanali stood firm, refusing to be intimidated. "Stop this, Gaia. You don't have to do this. We can still talk things out." Gaia scoffed at her sister's words. "You still don't get it, do you?" Gaia sneered. "No amount of words will stop me from reaching that monkey and ripping its throat out. This isn't some cheesy drama where a touching speech changes everything. This is real life, and in my world, blood is the only language my enemies understand, and I was just buying time." The innocent, helpless look on Zanali's disappeared and she looked relieved. Gaia turned around to face Zanali, her eyes filled with rage. But as she looked beyond her sister, her expression quickly changed to one of surprise and disbelief. Hundreds of soldiers suddenly appeared between Gaia and the dome around the castle, their armor shining in the sunlight. More soldiers continued to appear out of thin air, their colored armor indicating their affiliation with the Guardian Guild or the Nagaland army. As if that wasn't enough, a massive floating palace emerged above the castle, and flying airships bearing the Guardian Guild symbol appeared in the sky. Gaia couldn't believe her eyes. The backup had arrived and was much bigger than she anticipated. It wasn't just the Guardian Guild but also the Council of Immortals and the army of Nagaland. The sheer number of soldiers and their impressive appearance were enough to give Gaia pause. The floating palace was a marvel to behold. It was an immense structure made entirely out of white marble, with intricate carvings of serpents and dragons adorning its exterior. It seemed to glow with a gentle radiance, despite the stormy weather. The palace appeared to be surrounded by a golden aura, which pulsed with power and seemed to emanate from the very stones of the building itself. As for the airships, they were impressive machines. Each ship was made of gleaming silver metal, with sharp, angular lines and a streamlined design that made them look like they were flying knives. The sails were emblazoned with the symbol of the Guardian Guild, and they were powered by strange runes that made them glide through the air with ease. Soldiers armed with bows, swords, and other weapons stood ready for battle from the ship's decks. The army that had gathered in the sky was massive, their numbers stretching far beyond what Gaia had expected. As they floated in the air, the sheer size of the force was imposing. The soldiers were clad in shining armor, and their weapons gleamed brightly in the sunlight. The colorful banners of different kingdoms fluttered in the breeze, adding a vibrant contrast to the stark, blue sky. The army of Nagaland itself was impressive in numbers, but now it was multiplied by the forces of the Guardian Guild and the Council of Immortals. Flying airships with the symbol of the Guardian Guild emblazoned on their sails were dotted throughout the sky, adding a technological edge to the otherwise medieval appearance of the army. Gaia stood tall and proud in the face of the overwhelming army that surrounded her in the air. Despite the hundreds of soldiers and the imposing figures that flew out from the floating palace of the Council of Immortals, she showed no signs of fear. Her eyes glinted with a cold determination, her jaw set in a firm line. "If you want to reach Noah, you have to go through this army," Zanala's voice rang out, full of warning. Gaia simply sneered in response, her hand flexing around her bow. She knew that the only way to reach Noah was through the army before her, but she was not afraid. As the army rapidly closed in around her, Gaia braced herself for battle, her eyes scanning the mass of soldiers for any weaknesses or openings. The sheer size and power of the army were daunting, but Gaia was determined to reach her target. She knew that the only way to end this once and for all was to face the army head-on, and she was ready to do whatever it took to achieve that goal. Gaia's eyes blazed with an intense light as she raised her hand toward the sky. Suddenly, the space around her started to distort, sending ripples across the air. The sky began to darken, and thunder rumbled in the distance. A fierce storm appeared out of nowhere, with winds howling and the ocean surrounding Nagaland Island churning violently. The soldiers of Nagaland watched in awe and fear as they witnessed the display of Gaia's power. Even the Council of Immortals, who had seen much in their long lives, were taken aback by the ferocity of the storm that Gaia had conjured. As the wind picked up, Gaia raised her head and said, "You are not the only one with an army." Her words were carried by the wind and echoed across the battlefield. The soldiers of Nagaland braced themselves for the worst, knowing that they were facing a formidable foe. The sky trembled and the air around them grew dense and heavy. Suddenly, a portal ripped open, spilling forth a torrent of hundreds of soldiers completely covered in black armor. Each of them had an eerie aura about them, and their movements were stiff and mechanical. These were not living soldiers, but the Dark Lord's undead army. As they emerged from the portal, they encircled the army that surrounded Gaia. Their sheer size and ominous appearance made them a force to be reckoned with. The soldiers of Nagaland and the Council of Immortals looked on in shock and horror as the army of the undead kept coming out of the portal without slowing down. Unexpectedly, another portal appeared in the sky, and a group of dark-robed figures emerged from it. Their eyes glowed with a haunting intensity, and their skin was deathly pale. As they flew closer, their hissing grew louder, sending chills down the spines of those nearby. It was the vampire army, led by none other than Elder Vampire Saber. The army's sheer size and strength were imposing, and they quickly positioned themselves next to Gaia's army of undead soldiers. Together, the two armies created an unstoppable force, ready to take on anyone who dared to stand in their way. As Zanali and others were staring at the two armies, another portal opened, and through it emerged several imposing figures robed in a unique way. These were the members of the Vampire Death Squad, and their presence alone was enough to make even the bravest of warriors tremble. Leading the charge was Bear, a towering behemoth of a man who wielded two massive axes with ease. He was clad head to toe in black armor, and his eyes glowed with a feral intensity. Next to him was Snake, a wiry figure who moved with a serpentine grace. He wore a hooded cloak that hid his face from view, but the sickly green glow of his eyes was unmistakable. Behind them was the deadly duo of Grey Wolf and White Wolf. The former was a dwarf with a wild mane of hair and a thick beard. He was covered in scars, and his eyes burned with fierce determination. The latter was an elf with striking golden hair and a chiseled jawline. His movements were graceful and fluid, and his eyes held a cold, detached cruelty. Bringing up the rear was Spider, a half-elf woman whose beauty was matched only by her deadly skills. She wore a form-fitting suit of black leather that hugged her curves in all the right places. Her hair was a flowing cascade of blonde waves, and her eyes sparkled with deadly intelligence. Together, the Vampire Death Squad looked like an unstoppable force of nature, and anyone foolish enough to cross them would surely meet a gruesome end. As the Dark Lord's army descended upon them, the army of Zanali grew increasingly fearful. They watched in awe as hundreds of undead warriors, all clad in black armor, emerged from the portal. Some of the soldiers began to back away, unsure of how to react to this sudden appearance. "This can't be happening," one of the soldiers murmured, his voice shaking with fear. "They're the Dark Lord's army," another whispered, his eyes wide with terror. "We can't defeat them." When the soldiers of Zanali's army looked at the Vampire Death Squad and the rest of the Dark Lord's army, fear crept into their hearts. They were afraid, but they were also resolute not to back down easily. One soldier whispered to his comrade, "Have you ever seen such a terrifying army before?" His comrade nodded in agreement. "Not in all my years of service have I seen such a dark and fearsome army." Some soldiers looked at each other, determined to fight until the end. They may have been afraid, but they knew that running away or admitting defeat was not an option. "We will not back down. We will fight until our last breath," a soldier shouted, his voice echoing across the battlefield. When Zanali's army stared in shock at the appearance of the Dark Lord's army, they thought they had seen the worst of it. But then, another portal opened, and out of it emerged a figure that left them breathless. It was a young man in his late teens, wearing a black coat and trousers, and a white shirt. But what was most striking about him were his bat-like wings and his glowing crimson eyes that seemed to pierce through their souls. He had pointed ears that indicated he was a half-elf. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, and many in Zanali's army felt their hearts race with fear. They knew, without a doubt, that this was no ordinary man. They could sense the immense power radiating from him, and it made their breathing difficult. They looked at each other with wide eyes, wondering what kind of creature they were facing. Zanali herself was frozen, staring at the young man in awe and fear. She knew who he was, Azazel, the infamous demon butler of the Dark Lord. She had heard stories of his powers and knew that facing him would be a death sentence for many in her army. As Azazel slowly descended down, he looked around with a cold gaze, sizing up Zanali's army. His wings fluttered gracefully, and he seemed to move with otherworldly grace. The soldiers of Zanali's army felt a chill run down their spines as they watched him. He's Azazel, one of the guardians whispered, his voice shaking with fear. "He's the demon butler of the Dark Lord," another added, his voice barely above a whisper. Whispers spread through the ranks, and every soldier felt a shiver down their spine. They had all heard tales of the demon butler Azazel, but no one knew the true extent of his power. All they knew was that his presence alone was enough to make breathing difficult, and many couldn't help but tremble in fear. Chapter 922, Battle of Nagaland II. The Council of Immortals had made a grave decision. They had tasked 4 of their own to apprehend Gaia, the Dark Queen. It was a dangerous mission, one that could result in their own demise. Many immortals refused to fight, fearing the wrath of the Dark Lord if they were to interfere. But these 4 were different. They had had enough of the Dark Lord's tyranny and were determined to end it before it even began. They were old, 3 men and 1 woman, but they were powerful beyond measure. Their faces were etched with determination, their eyes burning with a fire that could rival the sun. As the armies in the sky grew in number, the ground below was cast in a shadow. The soldiers of Zanalis' army were afraid, but they stood their ground. "Just let me in the castle, and all the bloodshed could be avoided," Gaia's voice boomed through the sky, echoing across the battlefield. Her words were dripping with malice and contempt as she stared down at Sonali. The Dark Queen's eyes narrowed in anger as she waited for a response. When none came, she let out a sharp exhale, her frustration evident. "To protect one, you are willing to sacrifice hundreds. That is evil in my book." Gaia spat out the words with venom, her tone cold and unforgiving. The silence that followed her statement was deafening. The soldiers on both sides looked on in fear and awe, unsure of what to do next. The four immortals slowly descended from the sky, their presence commanding and powerful. Their bodies may have aged, but their powers were as potent as ever. They landed in front of Zanalis' army, facing the Dark Lord's army. "We will not stand by and watch as the world falls into darkness," the female immortal spoke, her voice steady and unwavering. The three male immortals stood beside her, their eyes locked on the Dark Lord's army. "We will do whatever it takes to stop you," one of them said. The soldiers of Zanalis' army watched in awe as the immortals prepared for battle. Even in their old age, they radiated power and strength. It was clear that they were not to be underestimated. "Azazel," Gaia looked up at the demon butler in the air. "Take no prisoners." As Gaia gave the order, the tension in the air intensified. Azazel, the demon butler, heard her command and transformed himself into a bolt of lightning with the use of his powerful spell, Lightning Dash. In an instant, he was soaring towards the female immortal, who had been assigned to capture Gaia. Azazel was a fearsome opponent, his strength equal to that of an immortal, thanks to his cultivation being tied to the Dark Lord's own power. He had never experienced the heavenly tribulation like the other immortals, making him a mysterious and dangerous adversary. With the ability to mimic the Dark Lord's spells, Azazel was an invaluable weapon in the Dark Lord's army. As Azazel drew closer, the female immortal braced herself for the attack, knowing she was facing a formidable opponent. The battle had officially begun, and it was clear that hundreds of lives were about to be snuffed out in Nagaland. The two armies collided in the air instantly, with Gaia and Azazel facing the immortals. They led the attack like ferocious beasts. The clash of swords and the whizzing of spells filled the air as the two armies clashed in a fierce battle. The Guardians fought with all their might, casting spells that shook the very foundations of the earth. The sound of thunder echoed in the sky as they summoned lightning bolts to strike the undead army. The Guardians also used their weapons, slicing through the undead with swords and axes. Meanwhile, the alpha vampires controlling the undead army showed remarkable coordination and tactical skills. They directed the undead to attack the Guardians in waves, using their numbers to their advantage. The undead clawed at the Guardians with their rotten hands and gnawed at them with their sharp teeth. They were fearless and relentless, driven by a hunger that knew no bounds. As the battle raged on, it became clear that neither side had a clear advantage. The undead were numerous, but the Guardians were powerful and skilled. The Guardians continued to cast spells, summoning walls of fire to incinerate the undead and using spells to paralyze them in their tracks. However, the alpha vampires continued to control the undead army with ease, directing them to attack the Guardians from different angles. On the other hand, the Vampire Death Squad wreaked havoc like a violent tornado. As the Vampire Death Squad flew into battle, Bear charged forward with his two giant axes, swinging them with tremendous force. His axes met the Guardians' weapons, and sparks flew as they clashed. The force of his blows was so powerful that it shattered the Guardians' weapons, sending shards of metal flying in all directions. Snake slithered through the air, his thin body making it almost impossible to track his movements. He darted in and out of the Guardians' ranks, striking with his venomous blades. With each hit, a deadly toxin entered the Guardians' bodies, causing them to writhe in agony and eventually succumb to their injuries. Grey Wolf and White Wolf moved together like a well-oiled machine. Their attacks were swift and precise. Grey Wolf used his small stature to his advantage, sneaking up on unsuspecting Guardians and dispatching them quickly and quietly. White Wolf, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of death, her elven grace allowing her to move with lightning speed. She took on multiple guardians at once, her deadly blades cutting through flesh and bone with ease. Spider was the most cunning of them all, using her beauty to lure guardians into her trap. She would flirt and tease, making the guardians believe they had the upper hand, only to strike when they were at their most vulnerable. Her swords and arrows were sharp and deadly, leaving a trail of blood wherever she went. As the vampire death squad fought, their brutality was unmatched. Limbs were severed, heads were chopped off, and blood rained down from the sky. The guardians fought back with all their might, but the vampire death squad was too powerful. The battle was a gruesome dance of death, with each move calculated and deadly. The sky was filled with the screams of the dying and the stench of blood and death. While the vampire death squad was absolutely slaughtering their foes, the vampires were equally as formidable, moving through the air with the grace and speed of a hurricane. Their supernatural abilities made them almost invincible, and they attacked with a brutality that left many soldiers trembling in fear. They tore into their opponents with razor-sharp fangs, draining them of their life force with each bite. Blood spattered across the sky as the battle raged on, with the cries of the dying filling the air. The soldiers of Xanalis' army fought bravely, but they were no match for the combined might of the Dark Lord's forces. The undead army swarmed them without mercy, clawing and gnawing at their flesh with a single-minded determination. In the midst of the chaos, the vampire death squad continued to cut a bloody swath through their enemies. Bears' axes cleaved through bone and sinew, while snakes' daggers left a trail of poisoned corpses in his wake. Grey Wolf and White Wolf moved like phantoms, striking without warning and disappearing just as quickly. And Spider's deadly accuracy with her arrows and swords was a sight to behold. It was a gruesome and terrifying battle, with both sides fighting with every ounce of their being. And yet, it seemed as though the Dark Lord's forces were gaining the upper hand. As the battle raged on in the sky, the Guardians had to use their knowledge of magic and their skills in combat to fend off the undead army and the Dark Lord's forces. Some Guardians chanted powerful incantations, conjuring massive spells that illuminated the sky with dazzling lights. The spells ranged from massive fireballs that exploded upon impact, to gusts of wind that could knock down entire rows of the undead army. The Guardians also used their magical abilities to shield themselves and their allies from attacks. The Immortals, in particular, showed the full extent of their power. They floated in the air, radiating an aura of pure energy that left many in awe. They used their knowledge of magic to cast spells of unparalleled magnitude, like a massive beam of light that shot out from the hands of the male immortal and scorched through the sky, incinerating everything in its path. The female immortal summoned a swirling vortex of energy that sucked in the undead army and shattered them into pieces. Even Zanali, who had been silent for most of the battle, finally drew her sword and joined the fray. She moved with a grace that belied her years, striking down vampires and undead with ease. Her sword glowed with white light as she swung it, sending waves of energy that cut through the dark army like a hot knife through butter. Despite the Guardians' best efforts, however, the Dark Lord's army proved to be a formidable opponent. The vampire death squad continued to take down their foes with brutal efficiency, while the vampires seemed to be unstoppable, using their regenerative abilities and super strength to overpower their enemies. The battle continued to rage on, with no end in sight. Gaia fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, her eyes glowing with a sinister crimson light. She quickly conjured up a storm of dark clouds around her, causing lightning to crackle and rain to pour down on the battlefield. As two immortals charged at her, she aimed her bow and shot a flurry of arrows that split into countless poisonous snakes upon impact. The snakes slithered and coiled around the immortals, biting them with their venomous fangs. As the two immortals were writhing in pain, Gaia chanted an incantation that summoned a massive serpent made of dark energy. The snake coiled around her arm as she aimed it at the sky and released it with a fierce roar. The serpent shot toward the heavens, tearing through the clouds and creating a massive explosion that sent shockwaves throughout the battlefield. Despite the overwhelming power of Gaia's spells, the immortals continued to fight back with their own grandiose magic. One immortal summoned a blinding light that illuminated the entire sky, causing the clouds to part and revealing the stars above. The other immortal created a raging firestorm that incinerated everything in its path. The sky was filled with the clash of spells and the roar of thunder as they continued their battle. The storm around Gaia intensified, the wind howling as lightning struck down all around her. Yet, she continued to fight with unwavering determination, her eyes fixed on her enemies as she unleashed spell after spell. On the other side of the sky, Azazel flew towards the two immortals, determined to use all his arsenal to take them down. A barrage of lightning bolts crackled with deadly electricity, hitting one of the immortals and causing a massive explosion that illuminated the entire sky. Dodging the spells of the other immortal, Azazel unleashed crescent-shaped blades of wind using his wind blast spell. The blades cut through the air like a razor, hitting the second immortal who staggered back with blood oozing from his wounds. Azazel then flew towards the wounded immortal and hit him with all his brute strength. The immortal crashed to the ground with a resounding thud, causing the sky to rumble with the force of the impact. The winds around them intensified, creating a storm of epic proportions. The battlefield was a chaos of spells and weapons as the Guardians and Nagaland soldiers fought with all their might, trying to push back the undead army and the vampire death squad. The outcome was still uncertain, and the storm raged around them, with lightning bolts illuminating the sky and casting eerie shadows on the battlefield. The power coursing through Azazel's veins made him ready for the next attack. He knew that he had to use it to take down the Guardians and the Immortals. The battle was far from over, and he was prepared to fight until the bitter end. As the battle raged in the sky above, the impact of the spells and weapons used by the Guardians and the Dark Lord's army was felt on the ground below. The spells cast by the Immortals and the Guardians were so powerful that they shook the very foundations of the buildings in the kingdom. The sky above the kingdom was lit up by bolts of lightning, and the rumble of thunder was deafening. The impact of the spells sent shockwaves through the air, causing windows to shatter and walls to crumble. The Guardians' spells left scorch marks on the ground, and the undead army left a trail of destruction wherever they went. The ground shook violently, causing buildings to sway and crack. The impact of the battle was felt for miles around, and it was clear that the outcome of this battle would determine the fate of the kingdom. As the battle continued to rage on, the ground shook even more violently, and the buildings in the kingdom began to collapse. The impact of the spells was so great that it felt like an earthquake had struck the kingdom. The Guardians and the Dark Lord's army were so focused on the battle that they paid no attention to the destruction they were causing. It was as if they were fighting in a world of their own, and nothing else mattered except victory. But the consequences of their actions would be felt for years to come. As the sound of battle echoed throughout Nagaland, many rogue cultivators stopped in their tracks, their eyes drawn to the sky. They could see the armies of the Dark Lord and the Guardians of Nagaland fighting in a battle of epic proportions. One rogue cultivator looked up in disbelief. Is this for real? I've never seen such a battle in my life. Another cultivator replied, it seems the rumors were true. The Dark Lord has finally come to claim Nagaland as his own. A third cultivator shook his head. I never thought I'd see the day when the Guardians of Nagaland would have to fight for their lives. This is a dark day indeed. As they watched the battle rage on, the rogue cultivators could see the spells and weapons of both sides causing destruction to the kingdom below. With the war in the sky raged on, the ground shook violently, causing buildings to crumble and roads to split open. The journalists from Royal News and other news agencies watched in horror from a safe distance, their cameras rolling to capture every moment of the carnage. One of the reporters from Royal News, a young woman named Sarah, felt her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the battle unfold before her eyes. This is insane, she whispered, her voice shaking with fear. I never imagined it would be like this. Another journalist, a seasoned veteran named John, could barely contain his shock as he watched the undead army swarm toward the Guardians and Nagaland soldiers. This is worse than anything I've ever seen, he muttered, his eyes wide with disbelief. I can't believe they're actually fighting in the sky like this. It's like something out of a nightmare. As the battle raged on, the reporters could feel the raw power of the spells and the thunderous roar of the clashes. The fear and desperation of the soldiers were palpable, and the reporters could barely process the magnitude of the destruction around them. "This is madness," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "How can anyone survive this? How can anyone even hope to win?" John shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know," he said. "All I know is that this is a battle unlike any other. And we're witnessing it firsthand. This is the first time I had written such a massive-scale war scene. So please forgive me if there are mistakes. I will strive to write better in the future." Chapter 923, Battle of Nagaland 3. The sky was alive with chaos and bloodshed as vampires and cultivators clashed in a large-scale battle. From the sky, they brought the war down to the ground, bringing destruction with them. Spells were fired left and right, reducing buildings to rubble and turning the once thriving streets into a war zone. The undead, with their rotting flesh and cold eyes, fought alongside the Nagaland soldiers on the ground, their flesh tearing with every blow they took. Undead to the barrier, as Azazel fought ferociously against the immortals, the Dark Queen barked an order at her partner in crime. Azazel, with his twisted grin, understood her perfectly, commanding the Alpha Undead to send a battalion of undead to the energy dome surrounding the castle. The undead, with their decayed bodies and rusted weapons, rushed toward the energy dome, their eyes gleaming with bloodlust. The energy dome sparked and burned as the undead threw themselves at it, trying to break through. Their skin sizzled, and their limbs charred as they pushed their way through, their screams of agony ringing out like a twisted melody. But their overwhelming numbers proved to be too much, causing the energy dome to ripple and flicker under their relentless assault. The battle was a gruesome affair, with bodies littering the ground and blood staining the streets. Severed limbs and entrails were scattered among the rubble, a macabre display of the brutality of war. The vampires and cultivators fought with ruthless determination, their eyes glowing with an insatiable hunger for victory. But the undead were just as fierce, fighting with a single-minded focus that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. They clawed and bit at their enemies, their rotting teeth sinking into flesh and their decaying hands tearing at clothing and armor. The stench of death and decay hung heavy in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid scent of magic. Amidst the chaos, Gaia and Azazel fought on, their power crackling and sparking with every spell they cast. The sky was awash with colors, with red and blue magic clashing in a deadly dance. They fought with a ferocity that was unmatched, their eyes glowing with a fierce determination to emerge victorious from this bloody conflict. The battle raged on, and as the sun began to set, it was clear that neither side was willing to back down. The undead continued their assault on the energy dome, their numbers dwindling with every passing minute. The Nagaland soldiers fought with a determination born of desperation, their weapons stained with the blood of their fallen comrades. Roalfa Dialphana Zanalis' eyes widened in horror as she watched the undead hurling themselves at the energy barrier, their undead bodies bursting into flames upon contact. The stench of burning flesh and hair filled the air, mingling with the acrid smell of magic. Amidst the chaos, Gaia flew down from the sky while evading the spells cast by the immortals as she swooped toward a bloated undead. The bloated undead was a grotesque experiment of Dalars, filled with noxious gases that could cause a massive explosion upon impact. Gaia's fingers dug into the rotting flesh of the undead, ignoring the putrid smell as she hurled it toward the two immortals hot on her heels. The bloated undead flew between two buildings, exploding in a shower of gore and viscera. Blood, flesh, and bone rained down on the immortals as they frantically cast protective spells to shield themselves from the blast. The explosion was deafening, shattering the windows of nearby buildings and causing the ground to shake violently. The deafening roar of the explosion echoed through the war-torn streets, sending shivers down the spines of everyone who heard it. The two towering immortals, now unprotected, found themselves under a rain of deadly arrows, each piercing through their thick skin with a sickening thud. They struggled to fend off the barrage of arrows while simultaneously trying to avoid the falling debris of the shattered buildings. The Alpha Undead seized the opportunity and signaled the horde to attack the vulnerable immortals. The undead swarmed around them, clawing and biting, their ravenous hunger for flesh apparent in their frenzied attacks. The immortals may have had bodies like steel, but the undead's relentless bites still caused them excruciating pain. As the chaos unfolded, Gaia's face contorted into a wicked grin as she charged toward the female immortal, her canines morphing into venomous fangs resembling those of a cobra. With a vicious lunge, she sank her fangs into the immortal's neck, injecting her lethal venom. The female immortal shrieked in agony, clawing at her neck as the poison spread through her body. Meanwhile, the male immortal, blinded by the jade mist sprayed by Gaia, writhed in agony, his eyes burning like hot coals. He tried to fend off the undead, but they were too many, tearing at his clothes and scratching his skin. Gaia, seeing the opportunity, summoned a crimson-red blade and lunged at the immortals with lightning speed, striking them with savage blows. Blood spattered everywhere as her blade found its mark again and again, slicing through flesh and bone. The scene was a gruesome display of carnage and brutality, with limbs and body parts strewn everywhere and the stench of blood and death permeating the air. Gaia's eyes glimmered with satisfaction as the two immortals finally met their demise at the end of her crimson blade. The undead eagerly descended upon the immortals' lifeless bodies, tearing them apart with their razor-sharp teeth and claws. But Gaia had no time to revel in her victory, for her attention was quickly drawn to Azazel, who was engaged in a brutal battle against the other two immortals. As she approached the chaotic scene, Gaia watched in awe as Azazel unleashed his full power. Dark lightning bolts crackled from his fingertips, illuminating the dark sky with a menacing glow. He dodged and weaved around the immortal spells, his wings flapping with ferocity. With each strike of his magic, the ground shook and trembled, causing debris to rain down upon the hapless guardians and Nagaland soldiers below. In the midst of the chaotic battle, Azazel was a force to be reckoned with. With his wings flapping furiously, he unleashed bolts of dark lightning at the two immortals who were struggling to keep up with his speed and power. His eyes were filled with a wild glint, and his lips curled into a devilish grin as he relished in the mayhem and destruction he was causing. As Azazel flew around the sky, his spells caused buildings to crumble and explode, raining down debris on the Nagaland soldiers and guardians below. He swooped down to attack the soldiers with his bare hands, tearing them apart with savage strength and merciless precision. Blood spattered across his face as he ripped through their flesh and bones with ease, leaving nothing but mangled corpses in his wake. The guardians, horrified by Azazel's brutality, tried to defend themselves with their weapons and spells. But their efforts were in vain, as Azazel's power and ferocity proved too much for them to handle. He lunged at them, snarling like a wild animal, and tore them apart one by one. Despite facing two immortals at the same time, Azazel never once faltered. Instead, he seemed to revel in the challenge, laughing maniacally as he dodged their spells and launched his own attacks. The air crackled with dark energy as he unleashed a barrage of spells at them, his wings beating fiercely to keep him aloft. And as he continued to wreak havoc on the battlefield, the ground below him was littered with the broken and lifeless bodies of his enemies. As Azazel continued to fight the two immortals, Gaia joined the fray and made a formidable team together. Gaia flew around the immortals, spewing a thick jade-green poison mist from her mouth. The mist hung heavily in the air, almost suffocating the immortals. With lightning-fast reflexes, Azazel fired a crackling bolt of lightning into the mist, causing a great explosion that sent the two immortals hurtling through the air. Gaia wasted no time and flew toward one of the immortals, stabbing him in the back repeatedly with her crimson-red blade. The other immortal tried to cast a spell, but before he could even finish the incantation, Azazel placed his palm on the immortal's face and fired a lightning bolt out of his hand, piercing through the immortal's eyes. The immortal screamed in pain as Gaia threw her blood-soaked blade at Azazel. Azazel caught the blade mid-air, and without hesitation, he sliced off the head of the other immortal with a swift motion. The decapitated head rolled on the ground, leaving a trail of blood behind. Azazel then threw the blade back to Gaia, who easily caught it. She continued to stab the remaining immortal in front of her, her eyes fixated on Zanali. The scene was brutal and gory, with blood and body parts littering the battlefield. The stench of death hung heavily in the air, making breathing almost unbearable. The combination of Gaia's poison mist and Azazel's lightning bolts made for a deadly combination, leaving the immortals with no chance of survival. It was a true display of power and skill, and the spectators who witnessed the battle were left in awe and terror. With the four immortals dead and their bodies being devoured by the undead, Azazel and Gaia turned their bloodied gazes towards the rest of the Guardians and Nagaland army. Just as Gaia and Azazel killed the immortals, more airships appeared in the horizon, ready to engage in battle. "Destroy them all," Gaia ordered Azazel, pointing at the Guardian airships. Her voice was cold and filled with venom, reflecting her determination to win this battle. Azazel's grin grew wider as he acknowledged the order and soared towards the airships with his dark wings. Gaia's robes were soaked with blood and her once lustrous raven hair was now matted with the blood of her enemies. In that moment, she looked like a goddess of war, ready to annihilate anyone who dared cross her. As Azazel departed to destroy the Guardian ships, Zanali swiftly sliced off a vampire's head, her eyes locking with her sister's. It was time for the final showdown between the two sisters, who had been at odds for so long. The tension between the two sisters was palpable as they floated in the air, circling each other like birds of prey. Despite her training, Zanali knew that she was outmatched by Gaia's immense power and skill. In a last-ditch effort, she reached into her space ring and retrieved the most precious artifact of Nagaland, an emerald cube. As soon as the cube appeared in her hand, Gaia's eyes narrowed with recognition. She knew the power of the artifact. It was the most formidable weapon in Nagaland's arsenal, one that hadn't been used in centuries. Zanali didn't hesitate. She crushed the cube in her hand, and it shattered into millions of tiny specks of green light that enveloped her. The specks of light danced around Zanali, forming a complex pattern in the air before coalescing into a grand armor. The armor was made of a vibrant green metal that shone like an emerald in the sunlight, with intricate patterns etched into the surface. It covered Zanali from head to toe, leaving only her eyes visible behind a glowing visor. The armor hummed with power, and Zanali could feel the energy coursing through her body, invigorating her with strength and speed. The armor was not only beautiful but also incredibly functional. It was lightweight and flexible, allowing Zanali to move with ease, yet strong enough to withstand even the strongest attacks. Two metal wings sprouted from Zanali's back, resembling a pair of dragonfly wings. They were made of the same emerald green metal as the armor, with sharp edges that looked like they could cut through steel. The mere sight of the armor made Gaia's eyes widen in surprise, for she knew that it was the most powerful artifact of the Nagaland treachery. The armor's main purpose was not to enhance the wearer's cultivation but to withstand an immortal's attacks. The metal used to forge it and the runes etched into it rendered the armor nearly indestructible, giving Zanali a fighting chance against Gaia. As Zanali hovered in mid-air, the armor hummed with energy, and her cultivation stage surged, reaching the half-immortal level. She clenched her fists, ready to face her sister in battle, while the metal wings on her back unfurled with a deafening metallic roar. Chapter 924, Battle between the sisters. As Zanali felt the power of the Nagaland artifact surging through her veins, she focused her will and channeled it into the runes etched onto her armor. A blinding flash of emerald light erupted from the armor, and a long sword materialized in Zanali's hand. The sword was crafted from a rare, deep green metal that seemed to radiate an otherworldly power. The hilt was decorated with snake patterns that seemed to writhe and move in the light, while the blade glimmered with an eerie emerald sheen. Gaia knew exactly what it was, the Sword of Nagaland, a weapon meant for only the reigning queen of Nagaland. Her fury grew as she realized that Zanali, a mere princess, had been granted such a powerful artifact by her father's foolishness. Gaia's eyes narrowed as she prepared to face Zanali and the Sword of Nagaland. Zanali's eyes blazed with determination as she dashed towards Gaia, her metal wings propelling her forward with incredible speed. The sound of her sword cutting through the air was like a siren, warning Gaia of the imminent danger. Gaia raised her crimson-red sword in anticipation, ready to meet Zanali's attack head-on. The two swords clashed with a deafening sound, sending shockwaves through the air and causing cracks to form in nearby buildings. The force of the impact was so great that it made the ground shake beneath their feet. The sparks flew as the two swords continued to collide with each other, each woman determined to prove her superiority over the other. The clash between Gaia and Zanali intensified as sparks flew from their swords, illuminating the night sky. Gaia's crimson-red sword glinted menacingly as she twirled it effortlessly in her hand while her other hand gripped the bow with expert precision. The onlookers gasped in awe as they watched Gaia wield both weapons with deadly accuracy. Gaia's movements were swift and fluid as she blocked Zanalis' attacks with her sword and simultaneously launched a barrage of arrows at her opponent. The arrows moved with a life of their own, guided by Gaia's energy as they homed in on Zanali. Zanali, however, was not easily defeated. She expertly deflected Gaia's arrows with her sword and closed in on Gaia with lightning-fast movements. The two clashed once again, their swords ringing out as they struck against each other. Gaia's swordplay was as fluid and graceful as a dancer's movements. She expertly deflected Zanala's sword strikes with her own crimson-red sword, which glinted dangerously in the sky. Even with the added weight of the bow in her other hand, Gaia showed no signs of slowing down or faltering. In a split second, Gaia switched from deflecting Zanala's sword to raising her bow and firing off arrows through the use of her energy. Her movements were so smooth and swift that it seemed like the sword and bow were natural extensions of her body. With each arrow she fired, Gaia used her energy to guide its trajectory, making sure it hit its intended target with deadly precision. The arrows flew through the air like streaks of light, whistling past Zanali and forcing her to dodge and weave. But despite the relentless barrage of arrows, Zanali remained determined and focused, her eyes locked on Gaia as she continued to press the attack. The sound of metal clashing and arrows whizzing through the air echoed through the battlefield as the two women engaged in a fierce and deadly dance of blades and arrows. As the battle between Gaia and Zanali raged on, the sky above them grew even more ominous as if reflecting the violent conflict unfolding below. The clouds turned a deep shade of gray, thunder roared in the distance, and lightning lit up the sky in bright flashes. The storm raged on, the winds howling like the cries of the dying. The rain was coming down in sheets, drenching the two sisters as they fought in the air. The raindrops were heavy and cold, making it harder for them to fly, but they continued to clash swords and arrows amidst the downpour. The storm was a fitting backdrop for the fierce battle that was tearing apart the castle, the flashes of lightning illuminating the destruction and adding to the drama of the fight. The sky above was covered with dark and ominous clouds as flashes of lightning lit up the battlefield below. Zanali and Gaia were suspended in the air, locked in a deadly dance with their swords. The clash of metal echoed throughout the ruined city, adding to the chaos and destruction that surrounded them. Gaia's eyes burned with fury as she glared at Zanali, her crimson-red sword poised to strike. Zanali's emerald sword glowed with an otherworldly light, and her metal wings shimmered in the stormy sky. "Look around you," Gaia spat, her voice barely audible over the howling winds. "All this death and destruction is because you didn't let me through the barrier. You could have saved them, Zanali. But you chose to protect that coward instead." Zanali's expression hardened, and she lunged forward, sword aimed at Gaia's chest. The two swords clashed once more, the impact sending shockwaves throughout the air. The energy emanating from their weapons illuminated the dark sky, casting an eerie glow over the carnage below. Gaia attacked Zanali with her sword and a barrage of arrows at the same time, the sound of metal clashing with metal and the whistling of arrows filling the air. But Zanali's armor was able to withstand Gaia's attacks, protecting her from any fatal wounds. Without the armor, Zanali would have been struck down by Gaia's relentless assault. Despite the power of the armor, it was clear that Gaia had the upper hand in the battle. Her attacks were swift and precise, and her control over the arrows was impressive. Zanali was barely holding her own, parrying Gaia's sword strikes and dodging the arrows with all her might. The stormy sky grew darker as they continued to fight, and thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind picked up, making it difficult for the two sisters to maintain their balance in the air. But they pushed on, their determination to defeat the other never wavering. Gaia's eyes blazed with fury as she spoke, her sword locked in a fierce clash with Zanalis. "You are making a grave mistake by standing in my way, Zanali," she spat out through gritted teeth. "If he comes here, you won't have anything left to rule." Her words hung heavy in the air as Zanali braced herself for the next wave of attacks. The dark storm raged on, lightning illuminating the sky with flashes of blinding light. With a sudden surge of energy, Gaia broke away from the clash and leaped backward, drawing her bow with a swift motion. Zanali's eyes widened as she saw the barrage of arrows hurtling toward her at breakneck speed. She brought up her sword to deflect them, but Gaia was not done yet. With a flick of her wrist, Gaia unleashed a series of powerful energy blasts that streaked toward Zanali, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. But Zanali was not defenseless. The armor Castian had gifted her glowed with a bright green light as it absorbed the brunt of the attacks. Zanali felt the shockwaves reverberate through her body, but she stood firm. Without the armor, she would have been no match for Gaia's onslaught. Zanali gritted her teeth as she clashed swords with Gaia in the midst of a fierce storm. "We will stop you and the Dark Lord," she declared, determination etched on her face. Suddenly, Zanali surged forward, delivering a powerful punch with the hilt of her sword that landed squarely on Gaia's face. Blood sprayed from Gaia's mouth, but instead of faltering, she cackled maniacally, revealing blood-stained teeth. In response, Gaia conjured a giant arrow with a wave of her hand and let it fly at Zanali, causing a deafening explosion that sent Zanali hurtling into the air. Despite their injuries and the bloodshed, the two sisters fought on with unyielding ferocity, refusing to back down. As the battle intensified, Gaia and Zanali began to cast spells at each other. Gaia chanted a spell and summoned a giant serpent made of black poisonous mist. The serpent lunged at Zanali, who responded by casting a spell of her own. She conjured a wave of green poison that took the form of a giant cobra, and the two serpents clashed in the air. The clash created a massive shockwave that shook the ground and sent debris flying in all directions. The sky turned a sickly green hue as if the clouds were made of poison. Gaia's serpent lashed out with its tail, but Zanali's cobra dodged and countered by sinking its fangs into the serpent's body. Gaia responded by unleashing a barrage of poison-tipped arrows, but Zanali used her sword to deflect them. The arrows hit the ground and caused small explosions, leaving behind craters of poisoned earth. Zanali retaliated with a spell that summoned a swarm of smaller serpents made of green mist. The serpents slithered toward Gaia, but she used her bow to shoot them down one by one. The battle between the two sisters raged on, and the sky and the ground continued to bear the scars of their magical combat. The Nagaland soldiers and guardians below watched in awe and horror as the two Nagas fought with all their might. The battle between Gaia and Zanali continued with ferocity as they unleashed a barrage of spells and attacks on each other. The sky turned dark as clouds of green and crimson poison hung in the air, causing anyone who breathed it to choke and cough uncontrollably. Gaia conjured a massive serpent made of green poison that slithered towards Zanali, its fangs dripping with deadly venom. Zanali responded by summoning a swarm of smaller serpents made of crimson poison that swarmed around Gaia, biting and tearing at her skin. Gaia retaliated by calling forth a gust of wind that sent Zanali flying backward, crashing into the ground with a sickening thud. Zanali quickly got back on her feet and unleashed a flurry of punches and kicks, each one fueled by the strength of the emerald armor. Gaia parried each blow with her sword and countered with her own attacks, striking Zanali with swift and precise strikes that left bloody gashes on her skin. Zanali gritted her teeth and fought back with renewed vigor, her attacks growing more brutal and savage with each passing moment. The two Nagas fought with such intensity that the ground beneath them began to crack and split, and the sky above them split open with flashes of lightning and thunder. As they continued to fight, the air around them grew thick with the stench of blood and poison, and the ground beneath them was soaked in a mixture of blood and poison. Despite the exhaustion and injuries, neither of them gave an inch, each determined to emerge victorious. The battle raged on, with no end in sight as both Gaia and Zanali fought with all their might, their bodies battered and broken, but their spirits unbroken. The only thing that could be heard was the sound of metal clashing against metal and the grunts of pain as each blow landed. Finally, with a scream of fury, they launched themselves at each other, their weapons meeting in a shower of sparks. And with that, the battle between the two sisters continued, with no end in sight. "Stop!" Suddenly, a dominant voice echoed through the sky as Gaia and Zanali both froze in their tracks. The voice was familiar yet commanding, and it was enough to halt their violent clash. Zanali looked relieved, while Gaia's fists clenched in anger. Slowly turning around, Gaia saw Castian, Zanala's father, standing tall and proud in his regal attire. Despite the tension in the air, Castian exuded an air of calm authority. He was neither too thin nor muscular, and his green hair was neatly styled. His beard was stubble, and his eyes resembled those of a snake, befitting his status as the king of Nagaland. Gaia's heart raced as she faced the man who she thought of as her father until she learned the truth. She couldn't shake off the realization that he was not her real father. Nevertheless, she tried to hide her inner turmoil and stood her ground as Castian approached them. Castian was dressed in regal robes of emerald green, adorned with golden threads and intricate snake patterns. The robes fluttered in the wind, billowing out behind him like the wings of a mighty serpent. "Enough," Castian said, his voice firm yet gentle. "I won't have my daughters fighting each other." As Castian's voice echoed through the sky, the battle below continued to rage on. The thundering clash of swords, the whistling of arrows, and the roar of magic spells filled the air, creating a deafening chaos. The ground trembled under the feet of the fighters, and the dark clouds above seemed to reflect the darkness and despair of the situation. Amidst all the chaos, only Gaia and Zanali stopped fighting, both still hovering in mid-air, their eyes locked on each other. The tension between them was palpable, and it seemed as if the slightest movement from either of them could trigger a renewed attack. Around them, the battle continued to rage on, with the Guardians and Nagaland soldiers fighting desperately against the undead and vampires. Blood flowed freely on the ground, and the stench of death filled the air. Despite Castian's sudden appearance, the fighting continued, for everyone knew that even a momentary distraction could cost them their lives. The Guardians and Nagaland soldiers fought with renewed vigor, their determination to protect their kingdom and people shining through in their every move. In the midst of all this, Gaia and Zanali remained locked in a tense standoff, their swords at the ready. The air between them crackled with energy, and it seemed as if the slightest misstep could trigger a deadly attack. As soon as Gaia heard Castian's voice, her heart sank. She had not seen her father for 3 years, ever since he disowned her and broke her meridians. At first, she was shocked to see him on the battlefield, but then anger filled her heart. How dare he show up here after what he had done to her? Castian, on the other hand, felt a mix of emotions when he saw Gaia. He was surprised to see her fighting on the battlefield, and it had been 3 years since he had last seen her. However, he could see the rage in her eyes, and he knew that she was still angry with him. Gaia watched her father approach, her fists clenched. She felt a mix of emotions, from anger to sadness to betrayal. She wanted to scream at him, to demand an explanation for what he had done to her. But she held herself back, not wanting to show any weakness in front of him. Castian stopped in front of Gaia, looking down at her with a mix of regret and sorrow. "Gaia, my daughter," he said softly. "I never meant to hurt you." Gaia snorted, her eyes flashing with anger. "You disowned me, Castian," she spat. "You broke my meridians and threw me out of my own castle. How could you say that you never meant to hurt me?" Gaia felt a pang of sadness in her heart. She had always longed for her father's love, but now that he was standing in front of her, she didn't know what to do. Looking at Gaia, Castian's emotions were a mixture of surprise, shock, and concern. "Gaia, stop this madness. You have fallen to the dark side. Listen to your father." Gaia glared at him with anger and said, "Father?" She snickered, "You betrayed me and threw me out of my own castle. You chose Zanali over me for Salisi and her offspring." Castian's expression turned sad, but he still defended his actions. "I did what I thought was best for Nagaland. Zanali is a capable leader, and I love her and Salisi." Gaia scoffed at his response and retorted, "Love? You call what you did to me and our kingdom love? You broke my meridians and threw me in prison while selling off our assets to feed the prisoners. You are no king. You are a coward." Castian looked pained by her words, but he still stood his ground. "I stand by my decisions, Gaia. I will always love you, but I won't apologize for doing what I thought was right for our people." Gaia snarled at him and raised her sword. "I don't give a fuck about you or your love anymore." All I care about is that monkey and Noah hiding inside the castle, and I won't let anyone, not even you or Zanali, stand in my way." With that, Gaia lunged at Castiel, ready to strike him down. But before she could make contact, Zanali intercepted her, and they resumed their battle in the sky. Castiel watched them, his expression heavy with regret and sadness, as he realized the deep rift that had formed between him and his daughter. Chapter 925, Holy Maiden's appearance. As the battle raged on between Gaia, Zanali, and the Guardians, Azazel found himself single-handedly fighting off the Guardian airships. His strength seemed to grow with each passing minute, and he couldn't help but think about the Dark Lord. His mind was consumed with the thought that wherever the Dark Lord was, he was growing in power, and this power was somehow being transferred to Azazel. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke and the clash of metal as Azazel single-handedly took on the Guardian airships. His muscles bulged and rippled under his skin as his strength grew by the minute, fueled by his connection to the Dark Lord. He couldn't help but revel in the feeling of power coursing through his veins, knowing that the Dark Lord was behind it all. The Guardians, flying out of their airships, attempted to stop Azazel with all their might, but they were no match for his raw strength and formidable spellcasting abilities. Their best fighters were only at the fusion stage, while Azazel had already reached level 8 of the immortal stage, making him an unstoppable force. With a flick of his wrist, Azazel sent a barrage of lightning bolts raining down upon the airships, causing them to explode into fiery debris. His eyes glinted with an otherworldly light as he launched himself at the Guardians, his movements quick and fluid like a serpent. One by one, he eliminated them with a flurry of blows and devastating spells. Azazel charged toward the group of fusion stage Guardians, a devilish grin spreading across his face. He relished the thought of taking down such powerful opponents, their blood spilling onto his hands. The Guardians tried to attack him with their swords, but Azazel easily evaded their attacks with his agility and brute strength. His demonic powers surged within him, causing the air around him to crackle with dark energy. Azazel raised his hand and fired a powerful gust of wind, sending the Guardians flying back. He then charged towards them, swinging his fists and delivering crushing blows that shattered bones and ripped apart flesh. The Guardians screamed in agony as Azazel's attacks grew more and more brutal. Blood spurted out from their wounds, painting the air red. As the last of the Guardians fell to the ground, Azazel turned his attention toward the airship. He leaped into the air and landed on the ship's deck with a loud thud. The ship's crew tried to attack him with their weapons, but Azazel easily swatted them aside with his massive strength. With a wicked grin, Azazel summoned a massive ball of lightning and hurled it toward the ship's engines. The energy exploded upon impact, causing the ship to shake violently before exploding into a massive ball of fire. The sky turned into a fiery inferno, with debris raining down upon the ground below. The debris from the explosion rained down upon the battlefield, causing chaos and destruction. The debris hit both the undead and the Nagaland soldiers, causing them to fall to the ground in pain. The battle continued despite the debris raining down upon them, with both sides fighting tooth and nail for victory. Azazel looked down upon the chaos with a sense of satisfaction. He had struck a mighty blow against the Guardians, and he relished the thought of causing even more destruction. He raised his fists to the sky, letting out a howl of triumph as the battle raged on around him. The Guardians in the next airship witnessed Azazel's brutal attack on their comrades and the destruction of their airship as they were filled with fear and desperation. One of the Guardians shouted, "We need to take him down. He's too dangerous to be left alive." Another Guardian replied, "But how? He's too strong for us to handle. By the gods, what kind of monster is he?" Another Guardian, his voice trembling, replied, "I don't know, but we need to stop him before he destroys us too." While they continued to panic and discuss their options, Azazel noticed their airship and made his way toward it, ready to take on his next opponent. "We have to stop it," a third Guardian said, determination in his voice. "We can't let it destroy any more of our ships." But despite their bravado, the Guardians couldn't help feeling a sense of dread as they saw Azazel effortlessly take down the airship before them. The sheer power and ferocity he displayed were unlike anything they had ever seen before. "We have to use all our strength," the third guardian said, his voice strained as he channeled his energy. "We can't let this monster defeat us." As the airship drew closer, the guardians prepared to face off against Azazel, knowing that their lives were on the line. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes, but even with all their training and preparation, they knew that they might not be able to defeat this powerful foe. Explosive flashes of light lit up the sky as the guardians fired their cannons at Azazel. Despite the incoming attack, Azazel charged forward, fearless, and sliced through the cannons with ease, his demonic aura growing hotter by the moment. Spells from the guardians flew toward him, but Azazel blocked them with brute strength, sending them back toward the ship. With a loud roar, he leaped into the air and landed on the ship's deck. The guardians tried to defend themselves with weapons, but it was too late. Moving like a blur, fueled by his demonic energy, Azazel tore through the guardians' flesh with claws and fangs, ripping them apart in a shower of blood and gore. The deck of the ship was soon covered in a thick layer of crimson, and the screams of the dying guardians echoed through the air. Azazel showed no mercy, ripping apart each guardian with a ferocity that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The sound of metal scraping against metal, mixed with the cries of the dying guardians, filled the air. One of the guardians, who had managed to stay hidden, attempted to cast a spell. Azazel sensed him quickly and turned around, his eyes burning with demonic fire. He grabbed the guardian by the neck and lifted him off the ground. "Eggless novel C.O.M. puny scum," Azazel growled, tightening his grip around the guardian's neck. The guardian choked, unable to speak or move. Azazel's eyes glowed with demonic power, and the guardian's body started to burn from the inside out. Screaming in agony, the guardian was thrown into the air, and with a swift movement of Azazel's hand, he fired a bolt of lightning that incinerated the guardian into ashes. The airship erupted in a massive explosion, and debris rained down on the battlefield below. The explosion sent shockwaves through the battlefield, causing many of the soldiers and undead to lose their footing. Unfazed by the blast, Azazel's demonic aura grew even stronger. He looked up at the sky, a fierce grin on his face, daring anyone to come at him. Azazel moved with supernatural speed and agility, leaping from one guardian airship to another, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. The sound of the guardians' cannons echoed through the sky as they fired relentlessly at him, but Azazel dodged them effortlessly. With each ship he destroyed, the sky was lit up with fiery explosions and the sound of metal being ripped apart. The debris from the airships rained down on the battlefield, causing chaos among the soldiers and undead on the ground. The guardians on board the airships tried to defend themselves, but their efforts were in vain. As Azazel descended upon them, they spoke in panicked tones, their words cut short by the sound of his brutal attacks. "Stop him. He's too powerful. We can't." The guardians' screams were drowned out by the sound of their bodies being torn apart by Azazel's claws and fangs. His demonic aura burned brighter with each kill, and he reveled in the fear and chaos he caused. While Azazel was wreaking havoc in the air, he suddenly felt the temperature plummet. The sudden drop in temperature caught Azazel off guard. Snowflakes, growing larger by the second, began to fall from the sky, obstructing his vision. Azazel paused in midair, his demonic aura blazing hot against the chilling coldness that enveloped him. Through the snow, Azazel's eyes widened in shock at the sight of a massive floating palace descending from the dark clouds above. The palace, carved entirely from ice, glinted in the strange light of the snowfall. The frigid aura emanating from the palace penetrated deep into his bones, sending shivers down his spine. A thick mist surrounded the palace, and as it floated down towards the battlefield, the mist spread out like tendrils, covering everything in a thick layer of frost. The soldiers and undead below shivered, their movements slowed by the intense cold. The palace floated down towards Azazel, and he could sense an incredible power emanating from it. It was a power he had never felt before, and it filled him with awe and fear. As the palace hovered above the battlefield, the mist dissipated, revealing its full glory. The towering palace was adorned with intricate carvings of ice and snowflakes, and the windows glowed with an otherworldly light. The frigid air around the palace seemed to drain the warmth from everything, and Azazel's breath fogged up in front of him. His fingers and toes grew numb, and he felt like he was freezing from the inside out. As the ice mist slowly cleared, a figure flew out toward Azazel. At first, he couldn't make out who it was, but as she drew closer, he saw that it was Rowena Winston. Azazel's eyes widened in surprise. Rowena Winston was a sight to behold. Her raven black hair flowed behind her as she flew through the air with an air of grace and elegance. She had a slender figure with a stunningly cold beauty that could freeze anyone in their tracks. Her eyes were the color of ice, and they seemed to pierce through Azazel's very soul. Rowena wore armor forged with a metal that looked like ice. It shimmered in the eerie glow of the snowfall, and Azazel could see his reflection on the polished surface. The armor was intricately designed, with snowflakes and ice crystals etched into the metal. The intricate designs carved into it were reminiscent of frozen snowflakes, giving it an ethereal and otherworldly appearance. The armor had a sleek, form-fitting design that accentuated her slender figure and moved with her fluidly. The breastplate had a high collar that covered the base of her neck, giving her an air of regal authority. The pauldrons were elongated and curved, tapering to sharp points that looked like they could easily slice through metal. They extended down her arms, protecting her biceps and forearms, and ended in sharp spikes that pointed toward her enemies. Her gauntlets were adorned with icy blue gems that shimmered in the light, giving her attacks an added elemental power. The boots were made of a lighter material, allowing for easy movement and agility, but still protected her shins and calves. As she drew closer, Rowena's eyes locked onto Azazel's, and she stopped in midair. Her expression was unreadable, and Azazel couldn't tell if she was there to help him or to kill him. He prepared himself for the worst, his demonic aura burning hot against the coldness of her presence. In her hands, Rowena wielded two long chains with blades attached to them. The blades were imbued with a frigid chill that caused everything they touched to freeze. The weapon was unlike anything Azazel had ever seen before, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of apprehension as Rowena approached him. Her appearance was both beautiful and deadly, befitting her position as the Holy Maiden. Their eyes locked in a tense stare down, both of them sizing each other up. Azazel could feel Rowena's power emanating from her very being, and he knew that he was in for a tough fight. Rowena watched the war around her with an icy gaze, her expression stoic and unreadable. Despite the chaos and destruction, she remained calm and collected, as if observing a mere game of chess. She had always been a woman of few words, and her silence only added to the tension and mystery around her. "You've caused enough chaos, demon," Rowena said, her voice carrying a steely edge. "It's time for you to stop. I don't recall taking orders from you, Holy Maiden. Your brother's filthy pet has spilled the blood of someone we held dear. So, neither the Dark Queen nor I will leave this place without spilling some monkey blood." Chapter 926. Returning the favor. The Holy Maiden's eyes blazed with righteous fury as she confronted Azazel, the demon who threatened the very fabric of their realm. "Your bloodlust will consume whatever humanity you have left inside. You threaten this very realm by existing. I will stop you before you destroy us all," she declared, her voice ringing out like a battle cry. But Azazel only laughed, his demonic grin sending chills down her spine. "You fools are only making things worse for yourselves," he sneered. "If the Dark Queen breaks through the barrier and reaches that monkey, lives will be spared. But by delaying her, you are making way for the Dark Lord. And when he arrives, the sea around us will turn crimson with the blood of your people." The tension in the air was palpable as the two adversaries stood facing each other. The Holy Maiden's slender form was clad in icy armor that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly power, while Azazel's dark wings spread wide as he towered over her. The wind howled around them, carrying the faint scent of blood and burning ash from the ongoing war. The sky above was a deep crimson, stained by the blood of fallen warriors. As the energy barrier flickered and lost its glow, the tension between Rowena and Azazel intensified. The cracks in the barrier grew wider, and the undead outside clawed with renewed vigor. The vampires cheered and roared, emboldened by the sight of the weakened barrier. The Nagaland soldiers and guardians scrambled, unsure of what to do next. But Rowena had only one thing on her mind, her little brother Noah, who was inside the castle. With a determined look on her face, she tightened her grip on her blades and dashed toward Azazel. The sound of her armor clanking and blades slicing through the air echoed in the chaos around them. Azazel smirked, unfazed by Rowena's charge. He lifted his hand, and a group of undead soldiers rushed toward her. Rowena swung her blades in a wide arc, sending a wave of ice and snow toward the undead. They froze solid, their bodies shattering into a million pieces as they hit the ground. She didn't stop there. Rowena leaped over the frozen corpses and charged at Azazel, her blades glowing with a cold blue light. Azazel summoned a bolt of dark energy and fired it at her, but she deftly dodged it and sliced through it with her blades. Their blades clashed, sparks flying as they exchanged blows. Rowena's icy blades glinted in the dim light while Azazel wielded a scimitar in his hand, snatched from a fallen guardian, but it was far from his weapon of choice. Their weapons clashed again and again, each strike echoing like thunder in the chaos around them. As they fought, the cracks in the barrier grew wider, and the undead army poured through them. Rowena's attention was torn between defending the castle and fighting Azazel. But she knew she had to keep him at bay, at least until her brother was safe. With a fierce determination, Rowena continued to fight, each strike of her blade sending waves of cold and ice toward Azazel. The battlefield was chaotic and bloody, but Rowena remained focused, her eyes fixed on Azazel, the man who threatened her brother and her world. Rowena's weapons were an extension of her will, and as she charged toward the undead and Azazel, she swung her blades with a fluid and graceful motion. The blades were attached to long chains, allowing Rowena to throw them, impale her foes, and yank them back toward her. The Holy Maiden moved with a deadly grace, her movements precise and calculated. With each swing of her blades, she took down multiple undead, her chains allowing her to strike from a distance and keep the enemy at bay. The blades were imbued with a chilling cold that froze the undead in their tracks, shattering them into pieces. Eggless novel COM as she approached Azazel, Rowena's blades were a blur, slicing through the air with a deafening whistle. Azazel dodged and weaved, but Rowena's attacks were relentless, and he found himself on the defensive. The chains attached to Rowena's blades were like extensions of her body, allowing her to twist and turn in ways that were impossible for a normal human. She threw the blades towards Azazel, yanking them back towards her at the last moment, making it difficult for him to predict her movements. In the heat of the battle, Rowena's armor began to glow with a bright blue light, and her eyes flickered like sapphires. Her movements became faster and more fluid, and her attacks became more precise and deadly. Azazel fought with all his might, but he could not match the Holy Maiden's skill and power. With a final swing of her blades, Rowena sent Azazel flying, his body crashing into the ground with a loud thud. Despite being a stage below Azazel's cultivation level, Rowena's fighting style was a perfect match for the demon's reckless approach. She used the chains attached to her blades with such expertise that it seemed like they were an extension of her own arms. With one fluid motion, she threw her blades, impaling the undead and yanking them toward her, all while dodging Azazel's powerful strikes. Her armor glinted in the sunlight as she spun around, her blades whistling through the air. Azazel's brute strength and lack of technique proved to be his downfall. Every time he swung his scimitar, Rowena would dodge and strike back with a flurry of blows, leaving cuts and bruises all over his body. But the demon's regeneration powers were astonishing, his wounds healed almost instantly, and he continued to laugh maniacally with every blow he received. When Azazel hit the ground, he immediately rose back to his feet, his wounds healing at an incredible speed. Instead of groaning in pain, he laughed maniacally and thumped his own chest as if reveling in the pain. Then, he dashed into the air, meeting Rowena's blades head-on once again. The two combatants were evenly matched, each landing blows on the other with impressive speed and precision. The undead began to crawl through the weakened barrier, adding to the chaos of the battle. But Rowena remained focused, her eyes fixed on Azazel as she danced around him with her blades. Azazel's scimitar clashed against Rowena's blades, sending sparks flying. But Rowena was not deterred, using the chains on her weapons to entangle Azazel's sword and disarm him. With a swift motion, she brought her blades down, striking Azazel with a lethal blow. But to her surprise, he merely laughed once again, the wound on his body already beginning to close up. As the fight continued, Rowena started to channel her magic into her blades, infusing them with the power of ice. With a flick of her wrist, she sent the icy blades hurtling toward Azazel. He managed to dodge them, but not without difficulty. The spells were grand and one of a kind, each one more powerful than the last. Azazel charged at Rowena, but she was ready for him. She yanked on the chains attached to her blades, pulling them towards her and impaling Azazel's arm. He grunted in pain and tried to pull away, but Rowena yanked on the chains again, causing him to stumble towards her. She took advantage of his momentary weakness and delivered a swift kick to his stomach, sending him flying backward. As Azazel rose to his feet, Rowena began to chant a new spell, her eyes glowing with power. Suddenly, the air around them grew colder, and a thick layer of ice started to form on the ground. Azazel's eyes widened in surprise as he realized what was happening. But before he could react, Rowena unleashed a powerful blast of icy energy toward him, encasing him in a thick block of ice. However, Azazel was not defeated yet. With a fierce growl, he broke free from the icy prison, shattering it into a million pieces. He lunged towards Rowena once again, but this time she was ready. With a swift movement, she sliced her blades through the air, creating a powerful gust of icy wind that knocked Azazel off his feet and sent him flying backward. The fight continued, each combatant giving it their all. But it was clear that Rowena had the upper hand, her ice spells proving too much for Azazel to handle. As the battle between Rowena and Azazel reached its peak, the sky above them started to darken. Azazel's eyes gleamed with a fiery intensity as he began to channel his power, his body radiating a menacing aura. Rowena tensed, her grip on her weapons tightening as she watched Azazel with wary eyes. Suddenly, the air crackled with electricity as Azazel unleashed a powerful bolt of lightning that streaked toward Rowena. The two Nagas clashed their weapons, causing shockwaves that shook the earth and created fissures in the ground. Meanwhile, the Nagaland soldiers were locked in combat with the Dark Lord's army. Despite being outnumbered, the Nagaland soldiers were able to hold their ground thanks to their king Castiel joining the battle. The sight of their king fighting alongside them gave them a much-needed morale boost, and they fought with renewed determination. However, their morale began to waver as they saw the undead break through the barrier around the castle. The soldiers could see the horde of undead crawling through the cracks in the barrier, and they knew that it was only a matter of time before the undead reached the castle. Fear and desperation spread among the soldiers as they realized their fight may have been for naught. As the undead successfully crawled through the castle barrier, Gaia felt a surge of adrenaline rush through her veins. With fierce determination, she launched herself at Zanali, relentlessly attacking her with swift punches and kicks. Zanali, despite her armor, was starting to feel the toll of the long battle, and her movements became increasingly sluggish and sloppy. Gaia's years of intense training and real battle experience allowed her to move with deadly grace and power. She began to land a barrage of punches and kicks, each one hitting with bone-shattering force. With a final flourish, Gaia fired an arrow that hit Zanali's sword, knocking it out of her hand and leaving her completely vulnerable. With a powerful strike to Zanali's chest, Gaia sent her sister hurtling to the ground, crashing onto a pile of rubble. Gaia wiped the trickle of blood from her mouth and cracked her neck, determined to finish the fight. But when Castiel saw Zanali's vulnerable state, he sprinted towards her, throwing himself in front of her to shield her from Gaia's wrath. The battle between Gaia and Castiel was now set to begin, but for a moment, both sides paused, locked in a tense stare-down. Gaia came to an abrupt stop, and the sound of her footsteps echoed in the silence. She landed on the ground with a thud as Zanali struggled to pick herself up, coughing up blood. Castiel's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Gaia, stop this madness. She is your sister." Gaia's expression turned cold, and she slowly turned to face Castiel. sorry to burst your bubble, but she is not my sister. And you were never my father. She spat out the words, slowly and menacingly walking towards Castiel. Gaia's eyes narrowed as she slowly approached Castiel. It's a mystery to me how you can expect me to listen to you after all you've done, she snarled. Let me remind you of your sins. You ignored me after my mother's death, married another woman, and gave her all your love, driving our kingdom into debt. You chose Zanali as queen instead of me, the rightful heir. You broke my meridians with your own hands, threw me into a dungeon, and left me to die.